Hey everyone, welcome to another glorious edition of me covering a debate from Politicon. I started doing this 2 years ago when I did Cenk Uygur versus Ben Shapiro, and everybody seemed to have liked it, at least the people that have commented on Quora and everything like that. So I decided to reprise that with this year's debate, and I try to pick the people that I think are the most interesting and the people I'm excited by the most to see them actually debate, which in this case would be Kyle Kulinski versus Charlie Kirk. Both are guys in their 20s. They are quite, I would say, respectful of facts and truth, that at least as they see it. Although I have, to be honest, seen Charlie Kirk contradict himself a lot of times on Twitter. On the other hand, to be fair, so this time I'm going to just state right out of the gate, I'm kind of on the center left, although socially I am sympathetic to conservatives. Economically, I'm more sympathetic to people on the left. I don't want to call them liberals because, they say you're liberal with other people's money. I actually think that liberals would actually be the fiscal conservatives in this case, because liberal is about the government staying out of your liberties. So whatever, just to give my bona fides right up front. Anyway, I hope to actually do this in one take, be entertaining, and hopefully be fair to both sides, even though I, like anybody else, am biased. Okay, let's begin. Okay, we're going to skip that because, it's not as exciting. This guy has been
hello. Politicon.
Hosting for a while, several years in a row.
Are you ready for the final debate of this convention?
Let's see them come out.
All right. Well, we're going to upgrade this microphone real fast.
Oh, yeah.
This is on. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay.
I remember the first debate, he came out and his microphone wasn't working the first week, so I was like, welcome. And it was funny.
All right. This is going to be a lot of fun. And you all know who we're about to welcome out to the stage. First of all, give a big round of applause for the host of the Kyle Kulinski Show, Kyle Kulinski.
Okay, so this is being filmed from the side of the stage, so obviously by someone who's probably not part of the main crew, like maybe that guy, I don't know. But the thing is, whatever this section is obviously cheering for Kyle. So this is all, just keep that in mind wherever the microphone is. The cheering is pretty loud for Kyle. I've done this analysis also in the Cenk Uygur thing. Just make sure that we compensate for how loud things are by where the microphones are placed in this recording.
I feel like thank you. Thank you, everybody.
And give a big round of applause to the head of Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk. And my name is Stephen Olikar. I'm the founder and president of the Millennial Action.
Okay, so there was a bit shorter applause for Charlie Kirk, so I'm going to, again, call it and say that he probably has less people in this audience that are in favor of his politics, although who knows, I don't know how many people are here, I'm not there, but let's have a go, let's see what's happening. He's got a bottle over here. Charlie Kirk's looking down at his notes. You can look at the body language. It's definitely different. We'll see throughout the debate.
Project, we're a nonpartisan organization working with the next generation of elected officials to bridge the partisan divide and strengthen our democracy. So it's a real pleasure to be here to moderate this debate. So shall we get started, guys?
Yeah, I'm wrong. He's got a bottle too.
Yes, sure. Yeah. So we have two rules. The first rule is that we will not be shouting over each other so the audience can hear what you're saying. The second rule is that I'm going to pose a question to one of you, and you'll have an opportunity to rebut the last statement, and then I'll give you each one more response. You'll have a maximum of 2 responses. That'll help us move on to the next topic.
Oh, look over here, and you'll have a opportunity to rebut and everything. I think he's reading off the teleprompter. That's probably what it's saying. Or it could be that someone's typing up what he's saying in real time. Which one's more likely? I don't know. Honestly, I'm not in the media space.
Topic. So this debate is going to focus broadly on 3 topics: the economy, culture, and international issues. And we'll see where that takes us.
All right, I'm going to say that this is coming after what he's saying, so that's probably real time, somebody adding closed captioning.
Are you guys ready? Let's do it. Have you guys ever debated each other before?
Well, we were on a panel together last year, and the point of the panel was, how are you going to get along? So we actually were able to agree that Saudi Arabia is bad, and locking up people for nonviolent offenses is also a bad thing. So there were some points of agreement.
And the death penalty. We agreed.
Well, that's right, and the death penalty too. So there were points of agreement, but we'll see, tonight if we agree as much. Doubt it. We're going to get into some specifics. So,
well, actually, I just want to say, same thing as the last debate, that, we, the American people, mostly agree on a lot of things. And the thing that has divided us the most is actually the internet. Now, most people don't get this, or at least I haven't heard them really articulate just quite this way. two things happened in the last 20 years. One is that journalism has been disrupted by the internet, okay? And now it's a race to the bottom for advertising dollars for journalists. So what they needed to do is lock in their audience. So the Fox News model kind of worked really well, and MSNBC copied it, and then the CNN decided, hey, if we just run with the same thing with the Malaysian Airlines flight for months, they're going to get a lot of ratings. So they kind of morphed into a lot of the time locking in their audience. And online, that looks like essentially clickbaity articles, a lot of outrage, or something like that people want to share on, Facebook. Which brings me to the second point, which is social networks started to allow people to, essentially, they want to promote stuff that you already have engaged with in the past, because that's what you're more likely to engage with in the future. So that puts everybody into echo chambers. See, social networks are in the race to the bottom for advertising dollars too. And their model is to get you on there as much as possible. So that also means outrage, and that would, make you write comments to one another. You're probably writing comments on this video over here. And so what we've got is essentially journalists putting out all these clickbaity outrage articles, and at the same time, people being herded into echo chambers into these social networks. So at the end of the day, you think your neighbor is suddenly morphed into a racist, homophobic person, or maybe you think that your neighbor has morphed into a communist who wants to take all your money. Either way, it's the same person, okay? And people start hating each other, sometimes in the same family politically. And that's what's insane. The polarization is not necessarily even due to Donald Trump or anything. You could argue that it started with George W. Bush and the wars, and then it kept swinging back and forth, with more and more ferocity. But I think it is the internet that divides us. And we need one site or one kind of wiki news or wiki analysis where people battle it out. So when regular people come, they see a more balanced news, like with Wikipedia or something like that. I think that non-capitalistic model might actually work a lot better. But anyway, let's continue.
I think we're agreeing on too much right now. Let's get into the debate. All right, let's start with the economy. So since Trump has been in office, unemployment has continued to go down. Job creation has stayed at a pretty high clip. On the other hand, there's an issue with wages, and just recently...
Oh, yes, actually, to his credit, Charlie Kirk, he's a big fan of Donald Trump. I don't know if he's really said anything negative about Donald Trump that I've seen. I don't follow him that much. It's good to be critical of your own party. I liked it in the previous debates when Ben Shapiro took digs at his own party, and so did Cenk. Here, so far, it's all rah-rah. But here's what I like so far. He hasn't said that Donald Trump has created all these jobs where under Obama, everything's been terrible. He's inherited a terrible economy, like Donald Trump says himself. So he's not saying that. He's actually saying the trends have continued at a good clip, which is true. But again, those trends have started maybe 8 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, with the stock market, with the unemployment numbers, with pretty much even the Bitcoin. But that's a separate story. Okay, let's continue.
The federal government came out with its deficit numbers for the last fiscal year, and it showed there's about a $1 trillion deficit, which is...
Ooh. Okay, sorry, I'm totally wrong. That wasn't Charlie Kirk. He's talking about the unemployment. Okay, so I'm sorry. That did sound very reasonable. Let's see if Charlie Kirk's reasonable.
It's the highest since 2012. So I will start with Charlie. Do you think the Trump economy is doing well for the middle class, given those numbers, doing well for the next generation that might inherit that deficit? And do you think the tax cuts are just a short-term boost is it like a sugar rush, or is it going to lead to long-term prosperity?
So that pretty much speaks for itself. In other words, the headline is, hey, the economy's doing great. The GDP has never been higher, etc., right? But at the same time, what's behind that? So Donald Trump is running the economy similar to how he ran his casinos and everything, where it's like you want to rev the engine as much as possible, make it the biggest, best casino ever, like with the Taj, right? And the bankers are telling him, look, no casino's ever been able to pay back the kind of spending that is going on. He's like trying to get the bankers fired for saying this. And then the casino goes bankrupt. And of course, he's bailed out by the banks, but lots of people are left holding the bag, right? In this case, the American people are the ones who are, well, there's the public sector. And if you're revving the engine of the private sector by putting the public sector into a deficit constantly, there's arguments as to why that's happening, right? But I wouldn't call Donald Trump a fiscal conservative. I mean, seriously, if he could put his name on every single, wall or highway, he would do that $1 trillion infrastructure plan easily, right? I mean, that was Bernie's plan. And when Bernie dropped out of the race, he ran with that plan. And he also said he'll take care of everybody with healthcare, etc., right? But no, he really does think big. And like all it takes is his name on everything, and he'll go ahead and push for it and get it built, right? So Donald Trump is not necessarily a fiscal conservative. He would be a big spender. And I don't know whether that's good or bad. I'm just saying that with the tax cuts, you're running a deficit. So you're literally subsidizing the private economy with the public one. And eventually the bill will come due. And what you'll have to do is probably at some point print the money. One last thing I just want to say about this is that the United States' biggest export probably is, it's actually, wait for it, Keep waiting. Dollars. It's dollars, right? It's not music. It's not IP. It's dollars. Other countries they use dollars to keep on reserve for their banks, for example, to use in their economies. So we can actually afford to print a lot more than, say, Venezuela can, or even Japan, right? And Japan has experimented with this kind of printing and, running a huge deficit year over year. And those deficits add up to debt. Eventually, we'll have to print our way out of the debt. And that's factored into the treasuries at this time. So savvy investors are thinking, okay, sometime down the line, that coupon that the treasury pays will be worth less relative to whatever real goods and services I'm getting right now. But while the party's going on, we're the best ones to have it because everyone's buying our stuff. And by our stuff, I mean dollars. And they give us basically a lot of other stuff for cheap. Okay.
Right. I mean, look, we have the best economy in American history thanks to President Donald Trump. And look, we're seeing the lowest ever black unemployment rate, lowest Latino unemployment rate, lowest Asian American unemployment rate.
So these things are significant. And yes, in real terms, you can say that this is the best economy. But again, usually when things are going well, that's when you should be paying down your deficit. Like under Clinton, we had a big boost before the dot-com crash, right? We had the dot-com boom, and a lot of that money was taxed and actually he balanced the budget for the first time in a long time. And so it's not just Clinton, it was Republican Congress. But the point is that if you don't balance the budget, it's not the end of the world, but there has to be some money printing going on sometime in the future. And who knows how we're going to handle that sort of thing going forward. I think at some point Trump said we're going to sell a bunch of oil for money. I don't know if he says a lot of things.
Lowest black poverty rate. We're seeing wages actually going up. So under President Obama, for the last 3 years of his presidency, the European economy and the American economy were basically the same, almost to the 5 decimal points. You couldn't distinguish between the two. The day President Trump got inaugurated, all of a sudden you saw explosive economic growth. So under the last 18 months...
Wait a second. There was explosive economic growth even the last 3 years of Obama's presidency. In fact, the economic growth, remember there was a depression, right? Almost a depression. There was a recession in 2008, okay? And that could have been handled really, really poorly. So a lot of what Obama did was actually lower taxes, right? And help stimulate the private sector, and that worked. Obama wasn't the only one doing that, though. The president isn't the only one. Yes, the president's office, the executive branch submits the budget, but for example, there's automatic stabilizers, which is the progressive tax rate. So when things go down, people make less money. They also pay less in taxes. Okay. And so the government gets less in taxes because the population's poorer, in terms of income. And so they get less revenue. All these things are independent of Obama's decision or Trump's decision. Now, Obama knew that, and he said those things in his address in 2009. He said, I didn't even make the budget yet. Right. So you have to also keep in mind the debt is going to keep climbing as long as there are deficits. Deficits are yearly deficits of budget, right, minus revenue. So if you're negative, if you're running a deficit, right, then that's going to accumulate. And you can't just simply cut the deficit to zero because then you have to either cut a lot of programs or you're going to have to tax everyone up the wazoo, okay? Or I suppose you could print money and give it to directly to government programs, but I'm not sure how much the electorate would like that. Anyway, the point is that people said Obama had the biggest debt under him. Well, Trump has a bigger debt under him, right? Because the debt keeps growing. We should be looking at the deficits and even more the rate of change in the deficits. Is this president lowering the deficits year after year, or is he raising them? And again, the president isn't the only actor here. But when Republicans control every part of the government, whether it's, the House of Representatives, the Congress, the White House, and they're still increasing the deficits from a $500 billion under Obama when he left to $1 trillion now, then you could say that whatever policies they're running, and they do have the majority, at least in the short term, seem to increase deficits, right? So again, that increases and it subsidizes the private sector using the public sector's money.
Months of President Barack Obama, we had about 1.5% GDP growth. President Trump doubled that after his first year in office, and we got even more than that. We went as high as 4.2% in one quarter last year. As far as average earnings, so under President Obama, the last 23 months of his presidency, average wages went up about $1.30 an hour, more or less. Under President Donald Trump, over the 2.5 years in his presidency, wages have gone up to $2.30 an hour, almost $1 increase, about 40% on average.
Okay, fair enough. So those are statistics, and I love that Charlie's bringing the hard numbers and the statistics. I do want to caution and say that wages and inflation are linked, right? When people make more money, goods start costing more because people are able to pay more, and people notice this. Vendors notice this. So wage growth is very important. That's true. But also it's important to make sure people can afford things. Let's look at, for example, the rise in rents, okay? If rents are rising faster than people can make money to pay that rent, then they're actually in real wages are actually decreasing, right? Even though you're making more money, but it costs you more to live. a reasonably decent lifestyle in the 21st century. Now, we could argue that this lifestyle is kind of extravagant compared to lifestyles throughout human history, including the 20th century, with the cars and the giant gas-guzzling cars and the houses that you heat with, like, the entire house when you're not there, and all this other stuff, right? And you're driving 30 miles, whatever. But the point is that you need to compare these things. And so if you need to make sure that basic necessities of life are actually factored in and not just wages. So in other words, you need to look at real wages and not just wages not adjusted for inflation.
Every single metric you could possibly look to in the economy is going in a positive direction. And it's because of renewal of the American spirit, deregulation of our economy, and the other thing that we don't talk about enough, and something that Kyle, I think you'll appreciate because we both don't like foreign occupation and foreign war.
Yeah, by the way, the deregulation does indeed help spur the economic engine of the country. I think even Kyle would agree with that. It's just a question of the protections that people get. So, for example, you may deregulate the Clean Water Act, right? And then people can start dumping stuff in river. In the short term, maybe that will actually decrease the cost for many companies. And maybe soda will be cheaper now, okay? But someone's got to be drinking that water, right? Or the plastic being dumped, and then winding up in the animals, and then you eat the animals. So the bill does come due, okay? And sometimes the bill comes due in other things than money, like human health and prosperity is not just about money.
President Trump has finally made this country energy independent, that we don't have to buy our oil as much from the Middle East thanks to what? Fracking, natural gas, and innovative technology that a lot of people on the left want to outlaw and completely get rid of. We are now.
By the way, this is an amazing example here. He's absolutely right. The United States is energy independent and much less interested in the Middle East than it used to be. Who knows how many wars and how much blood was spilled over the oil, and I think that Kyle would agree. However, at the same time, the same U.S. government was subsidizing the fossil fuel industry to the tune of billions and billions, right? Every decade, they were putting their thumb on the scale versus, say, electric cars. Maybe if they hadn't been doing that, then we would have electric vehicles, which we already had in the beginning of the 20th century, but we would also have better batteries. We would have better technology, like we're now starting to get with Tesla, for example. And now the other manufacturers are trying to get electric vehicles on the road. If we get the government to subsidize look, it's already been subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. If it hadn't been doing that, if there was a free market, then electric vehicles might have actually become cheaper. Like now, we have electricity taking over fossil fuels in Texas with the wind farms and the solar, and in California, where you got a lot of sun and everything. And here's the other thing. Electricity is actually the lingua franca. It is the money, the free market of the energy world, because electrons can carry energy of any type of energy that was generated. It could have been nuclear fusion tomorrow would be invented, and suddenly everyone could take advantage of it, right? So electricity could take any kind of energy, geothermal, hydro, wind, solar, you name it, right? And of course, nuclear. You could have built a lot of nuclear reactors. In fact, some cities would have to build nuclear reactors right now in order to desalinate water, because they're actually running out of a real resource that we need. Forget oil, we need also actual water. And that's a whole other subject. Because there's day zero where there's some cities like in South Africa where they just are going to run out of water, and then you have to ration water. So yes, we could solve a lot of these problems, but instead with fracking, we're actually wasting water in order to get the oil out of the ground. What I would argue for is more sustainability. So yes, it's nice that we're energy independent, but we could have already been energy independent if the government hadn't been subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. And every time OPEC or the Suez crisis or something would happen, it would raise the price. Okay, that's the time that we would actually invest in electric battery technology or maybe electric cars. But no, people's got to get to work today, right? So if our economy is totally locked into one type of fuel, right, then you're going to see the government bailing out that type of fuel every time. So it's not an accident. Your refrigerator doesn't run on hydrocarbons and fossil fuels, right? There's no container that you have to pour into your computer. But when it comes to your car, right, the entire country is running on one type of fuel. So that is actually government distortion. And that is very important. I think Charlie Kirk would agree with me on this. So look how much war and how much intervention that has led to. So yes, I'd like to see more nuclear reactors. I'd like to see them desalinating the water for certain cities. And I'd like to see more innovation with electric cars being able to take any type of energy, just like your refrigerator does, just like every other appliance does.
Now, for the first time in American history, exporting more oil than we are importing. So we don't have to buy oil from maniacs in the Middle East that hates our guts and entire civilizations and theocracies that want to destroy America. And that's a very positive thing that doesn't get talked about a lot. And look,
by the way, I like how Charlie Kirk presents these things. Yeah, I think that since you both agree that funding maniacs in the Middle East may not be the greatest thing, and having ISIS run off of oil revenues may not be the greatest thing, right? Just like with the drug war, when you have the Zetas and the Sinaloa cartel running off of the drug money, that's not a great thing, right? But at the same time, we're arguing, we're playing this video game as to the economy. Okay, oh, we make more money. Oh, we're independent of you. That's inside the video game. When your house is on fire, when the earth is being polluted, let's say by plastic, right? Or the ecosystems are dying, like the coral reefs, or like the insects are being decimated, or like the birds now, 25% of birds are like disappearing. You got to take notice, right? When 30% of farmland is becoming desert, you got to have sustainability. And what I see is left versus right playing a video game, the house is on fire, and they're like, no, but I got more points, man. I got more points. Like, yeah, sure, you're making more money, but it won't matter, right? It won't matter if, let's say, there's no more insects, right? Or you have to start trying to save the bees from colony collapse disorder, and all of a sudden, the ecosystems completely change. Now, maybe we'll be able to survive. Maybe we'll be able to have monocultures and farms, and everything will be cows and chickens, and like the other species will just not be around very much at all. Like the tiger is, going extinct. Fine, whatever, right? Maybe. But how do we know? How do we know that nature with such a narrow biodiversity is able to survive? Why don't you try it out in some kind of biosphere before you subject the entire planet to these games of like, I can produce more oil than you, and I can put more CO2 in the atmosphere, and we'll just see what happens. Probably nothing will happen. Don't worry about it. I'd like to see a more sustainable humanity. But humans are, of course, as an organism, humanity is very rapacious, right? It's very non-disciplined. And I wonder if we could reprogram society like we have done in the past through technology, through cultural awareness and changes in the culture to start actually living a sustainable lifestyle. Whether it's, overfishing or whether it's anything else, it's not great to say that, oh, now we're independent of you. That's only the beginning. The point really is, how do we all become a sustainable economy, and also ecology, so we don't go extinct, or at least we don't have massive wars later over resources.
Broader picture is that the economy is so good that even President Barack Obama is trying to take credit for it, right? I mean, we are seeing an economic renaissance, the likes of which...
That's a funny rhetorical flourish, but the point is, of course, Obama started that run-up. In the beginning, it started under him, I should say, and it continued under Trump, right? So it's not fair it's funny, but it's not really fair. Obviously, Obama is taking credit for something that started under him and continued.
Is historic and unprecedented.
What do you think would happen? Trump would get into office and all of a sudden things would either drop or stay the same. Yeah, some people actually believed that, but didn't. So, credit to Trump for not, making the plane crash and in fact continuing to fly even further. Deregulation does help boost the engine, but the question is, how much boost do we need at this moment? Who knows? That's a question for the markets.
There were economic malaise under President Barack Obama, and now we are seeing prosperity that is totally amazing. And whoever's the credit for it, Kyle, we can debate that back and forth, but the results are not to be debated. I have a packet of the most amazing economic success you could possibly imagine. It's a good thing that we have the lowest black unemployment, Latino unemployment, Asian unemployment, disabled unemployment, lowest ever black poverty rate. My favorite statistic, I'll close with this, 6 million people are no longer on food stamps, and now in the labor market, that's 6 million people that don't have to go get food stamps anymore, thanks to President Obama's. All right, Kyle, that's fun.
That last thing, so I like what he said, and also to sum up, he said that there's higher unemployment, especially for minority groups. That's important. We're energy independent. That's important. We're talking about the economy, so I should actually give him credit. He's talking about the economy. Even if the economy is growing at the expense of the environment, I guess in a narrow sense, right, since we're talking about the economy, then Donald Trump is, in fact, revving up the economy by deregulating, by, making it harder for people to receive assistance. So they must go into the job pool. I don't think we're ready as a country to speak about universal basic income and everybody be on board with that. I don't think we're even ready to talk about universal health insurance for everybody and everybody being on board with that, even though other countries have already kind of made that transition. So, if we're not there as a country, then yeah, I guess jobs and wages is the way for people to get the kind of living that they, can enjoy while preserving their dignity. So props to Charlie for pointing out, I guess. You could also spin it the other way and say, look, people got kicked off of the SNAP program, the food stamp program, because it was reduced, right? Some people look at the workfare and the work requirements as a good thing. Some people say it's kind of heartless because there's always cases where people actually needed those food stamps and they couldn't get them. So what does it mean that they went into the jobs market? Oh, maybe they took on some kind of job which was even more demeaning than simply being a student or studying philosophy, or how about raising your kids or taking care of your parents, which are unpaid jobs. So anyway, interesting points. Let's see how Kyle responds.
Okay, so there's a lot there. I'll try to make my response relatively short here. I don't think...
Quick skip to the end. He doesn't. He doesn't make it short. Let's go.
The way that we measure the
But to be fair, neither do I.
economy, the metrics that are typically used by mainstream media, I don't think they're good metrics. I think they're absolutely terrible metrics. I think that...
Okay, so analyzing that sound, the clapping, right? Most of the clapping is coming from the neighborhood of this camera. At least, otherwise you'd hear a more even, like, tick, 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 tick of clapping. So, okay. But yes, who's been saying this is Andrew Yang, right? He's saying, he's had that whole thing where the GDP, the guy who invented GDP, basically didn't want the GDP to be used as a measure of economic prosperity, or at least as the prosperity of humans, right? And he spoke about things like raising your children, things like the health of Americans, things like the life expectancy, and so on, and maybe even self-reported happiness, right? Look how much depression there is in the United States. Look how much, how many people are on antidepressants or opioids, and the amount of suicides that are happening. So, is this a country that's happy? A bunch of people that are very happy? Now, these are not just economic issues. These are things where the economy could be great, and people are living alone in an apartment away from their parents, right? And not getting married until they're like 40, and then they don't have any kids. And then they wonder, why am I so lonely? Why is this I'm kind of depressed a little bit, and then the men who after 2008 have been laid off, well, maybe they can't find a job anymore in an industry where they used to be respected, and so on. So it's not necessarily just an economic thing. The economy could in fact be great, but everyone lives alone, and the decline of the traditional, sort of structures like family, like the village, like the extended family and support are breaking down, and we're trying to find new ways to sort of be happy and fulfilled in life. And that's not always easy. So yeah, there are different ways to look at society, but we're not really there. As Americans, we're looking at sort of the GDP, right? And how much can we rev the macroeconomic engine. But in the microeconomy, we all kind of feel like something's a little off. And mostly that's because our rent is really, really too damn high.
You look at something like the unemployment rate, okay, I'll give him partial credit for that unemployment rate going down, but then you also have to give Obama partial credit for that as well, because he did dig us out of the hole of that Great Recession. But basically, listen, the point is, Donald Trump used to bring up this thing called the U6 unemployment rate. Now, the U6 unemployment rate is a more accurate reflection of what the real unemployment rate in the country is. I mean, I'm sure you guys remember back to the primary season, he'd be like, the actual unemployment rate is really more something like 10%, 15%. You would always kick that number.
Hey, props for trying to do the voice.
Up because Donald Trump was kind of right. The way we calculate it is nonsense. So when you look at...
You see, he says Donald Trump was kind of right. And I like that. Imagine Charlie Kirk saying, Obama was kind of right about a lot of things. Maybe you should pump your wheel, and actually then you would have to use less gas. No, they made fun of Obama for so many things. Oh, Obama, you ordered a sandwich with mustard of Grey Poupon. Look at you. You out of touch with the people person you. Anyway. That's Sean Hannity. But the point is that, yeah, I like that you give credit to the other person, right? Even though he may be such a odious person in many ways, right? To many different people for many different reasons, but still, you gotta give the guy credit. And yes, he may contradict himself, and that's actually a major thing, right? What he says in 2012 about Obama, then he says the exact opposite about himself, right? And I wish that Kyle would bring up this thing, as he doesn't do in this interview, in his debate, which is that, he used to say that the jobs are phony, and then as soon as he got into office, right, the next month, February, Spicer comes out and he's like, yeah, I just asked the president about that, and he was very clear about this, to say this, the jobs used to be phony, but now they're absolutely real. And everyone's laughing at how much of a hypocrite, how hypocritical that whole thing is. And what else can you do? But whatever, go on.
The real unemployment rate, I actually should say the official one is 3.5%. The U6 unemployment rate is 6.9%, so it's significantly higher than what's often touted by mainstream media. And you have to include the discouragement.
You know what? I just want to find that clip. So you see, I'm not just being against Donald Trump here. You got to give him credit. But I just want to say, okay, here it is. We're doing Sean Spicer unemployment rate. Absolutely real. Something like that, yeah? I mean, I am not making this up. This is literally the video, and they were just laughing. Sean Spicer is laughing, and he's like, I don't know how to spin this. This is this one. So here we go. Something, I don't know. Just play it. Play it. Just to give you an example, I don't like to overstate. I want to show that what I'm saying, even though it sounds preposterous maybe, is actually based on reality. Come on. Come on, internet.
In the past, the president has referred to particular job reports as phony or totally fiction. Does the president believe that this jobs report was accurate and a fair way to measure the economy?
Yeah, I talked to the president prior to this, and he said, to quote him very clearly, they may have been phony in the past, but it's very real now.
See what I mean? Ha, 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 ha. What can we really say about this? The president told me to say it. Anyways, let's continue.
discouraged workers. You have to include the people who work on and off, and people who are part-timers who want to be full-timers. So there's this whole category called the underemployed, and that's another 22 million people. You have 8.6 million people officially categorized as working poor in this country.
So I like that the actual numbers are being laid down by both Charlie and, here we go, Kyle Kulinski talking about the underemployed people. That's very important. And also people who are maybe overemployed. They have two jobs because really what they're after is the money, right? It's not that they necessarily want to work two jobs, although maybe they do. Sometimes people like to work and write open source software on the side, right? But the thing is that, yeah, people who need to work two jobs just to survive, that's a sign of the times, right? And that's important to understand. It's the rent, stupid, right? You gotta be able to pay for basic life necessities. One day, I feel that we will, in fact, have a society which recognizes, okay, let's have capitalism, right? But then let's have a safety net underneath where everybody gets it because everyone needs to eat and everyone needs to go to the bathroom and everyone wants to have a roof over their head. And then above that, sure, engage in capitalism, right? But just that safety net will allow you to take risks which you otherwise would not take. Like J.K. Rowling writing Harry Potter and then making $1 billion industry. Who knew? She was rejected so many times, but look at that. Or Jan Koum creating WhatsApp and then selling it for $19 billion, I believe. Look, if they hadn't had the safety net, if their family had to, if they had to pay for their father's operations or something, there's no way that they probably would have gotten that. So it could be argued that a safety net will actually boost America's economy by freeing up all those kind of ridiculous things. There's studies that show that poor people have lower IQ or economic IQ because literally first of all, their mind is occupied by how am I going to pay the rent the next month? And here Kyle really gets into the statistics which affect the majority of Americans. Take a listen.
Country, you have, this fact always gets me. I think it's incredible that 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. 78%. That's nothing to write home about. And
I actually did not know 78%. I really thought it was a little bit less, maybe about 60 or 50%. But regardless, right? What does paycheck to paycheck mean? A lot of times, people miss that paycheck or they get laid off or it's late or their employer is not a large corporation. So they might, have trouble with payroll. What happens? Well, that person now has trouble paying their landlord, right? And there better be some renter protection laws. Otherwise, they're going to be on the street. People say, why is there rent control? Why is there anything? Well, when you got to renew your lease, a lot of the people in the local economy, in the local city, vote, and that's what democracy does. They vote in people that will protect their interests vis-a-vis the people coming in, right? In this case, the other people being richer, being the, let's say, a millionaire who wants to park their money in some real estate locally and gentrify the region. So the local people are like, no, we want to protect our, rent from going up too much. And so it's a function of democracy. The same way that Charlie might talk about immigrants not coming in because we want to protect our jobs. Same way Kyle would talk about someone protecting from billionaires, just coming in and capital coming in and human capital coming in and driving up the prices. If you look at all the places where rents are unaffordable, it's usually because people came in from the outside. Capital came in terms of money and human capital, like with LA, where you have the movie industry, right? And everybody came to make it. Or in Silicon Valley, which used to be orange groves and now has the highest rents in like the world almost, right? New York City, right? So all these cities have rent control and protections specifically because the locals don't want to be priced out of their own home over time. And not everyone understands this, but that's how it shakes out in a democratic city.
And listen, half of workers make $30,000 a year or less, and 40% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency. So,
1 second, $30,000 a year or less. That doesn't say anything. This one I don't like because you got to tie it to rent. You got to tie it to some inflation index or something. What's the cost of living, right? Because if you don't do that, then $30,000, in the 50s would have been incredible, right? In the 60s, incredible. So it's not the absolute number. It's actually what, you spend the money on. $400, you can't afford an emergency. That's important. The fact that you're living paycheck to paycheck is important. The fact that American consumers are now, again, in huge debt, right? They're in huge debt is important. And by the way, this is also true in countries which have the highest economic freedom. Okay, go straight to the highest, Hong Kong, right? The poverty rate there is staggering. 1 in 5 people lives in like a shoebox. Literally, 4 people together could not afford a studio apartment. So they live in these tiny coffin-like, cage-like apartments, and then they work. Why do they have to be there? Because again, the prices go up so much of the rent, but you need to be there in order to work, right? Otherwise, what are you going to do? Someone's got to work, and if they're willing to put up with it, they work. And the elderly and the children, well, they're going to live there, right? So there's got to be something. So Hong Kong has to deal with that. Keep in mind, this is the country that conservatives would say is the top, in the economic freedom list. Well, you know what? That same country also has public hospitals. It has like 50 public hospitals and 20 private ones, right? It's a small country, but the point is they're able to make public hospitals work. That is government-run healthcare. It's not even single payer. It's government-run. So those two things are compatible. If you look at Singapore, similar things, right? You've got the private healthcare industry, and then you've got the public hospitals. The point is that other countries have figured out that economic freedom is not necessarily antithetical. You don't destroy it by having public services like police or education, or in this case, hospitals. These are public services. They may cost a lot, but since people need them anyway, healthy people might actually lead to a better economy, and in fact might attract more capital because, you get healthy workers, you get a nice tourist industry, and so on. Okay.
Actually, what I would have agreed with you on if you presented it this way is, man, Obama kind of sucked, but so does Trump. Number one, you 6 unemployment.
See, I don't know if that's even a win debate-wise, because all you did is flip and say they both suck. Look, I know Kyle, he's very much to the left of Obama, but seriously, Obama's not that bad of a dude, man. I mean, it's hard to just shift to single-payer healthcare overnight, and try to pass it through, which he was the only one who actually got it done. I think Hillary was trying and talking about it, and she might have done it. He did it, right? He actually did it. It takes political capital. Now, is Bernie able to do it? Look, I like Bernie a lot, but his campaign needs to start appealing to someone more than just the young people. He's done. He's got the young people. He's got to get celebrities who people from 30 to 80 listen to, not, celebrities that they don't even know who they are. And every week he's got to have new celebrities coming out because he's just a consistent guy. He's not going to get coverage. Ron Paul was a consistent guy and he got no coverage, right? It's not necessarily that the establishment media is against Bernie or Ron Paul because they are anti-establishment only. It's because literally there's no controversy, there's no ratings, there's no excitement. Oh, in other news, Bernie said the same thing he said 5 years ago and 15 years ago, and it's still true. Seriously, when Cardi B came out, that was a big thing, right, for him. When, let's say, Killer Mike, right, that guy is really interesting. He comes out, that's a demographic he needs to actually win, black communities, right, who, by the way, in the last election, white people voted kind of 50-50 with Bernie and Hillary, right? The black community was really afraid to vote for Bernie because they thought he would lose, or at least that's the analysis on 538. The point is, though, she lost, right? And he could have won. So I don't know what the dynamic there is exactly, but Bernie's been fighting for, for civil rights of black people since the 60s, right? She hasn't been. She was talking about super predators. So why would people vote for her over him? I don't know. I'm not black, but I'm just going to say that Bernie needs to start being more savvy. His campaign needs to actually target the demographics he's not winning, because otherwise they're going to vote for Biden the same way people voted for Trump because he wasn't Hillary. They're afraid of him. And they shouldn't necessarily be. But anyway, going back to Obama. Obama actually surprised everybody. Black people were surprised that white people voted for Obama. I don't know why that's funny. And by the way, he's half white. But I'm just trying to say that, the point is, and that's neither here nor there, but my point is this, that I would like to see, sort of the country come together on issues, whether it's body cameras for cops, whether it's the environment, right? Whether it's actually putting in place a UBI or universal healthcare. A massive amount of people support these kinds of initiatives, right? Which benefit everybody without singling out a certain group or demographic, just a rising tide that lifts all boats, right? Should we invest in new kind of energy so we lead instead of China? Sure. So should we remove the drug, end the drug war so maybe there's less violence, right in our neighborhood with the original ISIS, right? The cartels. Yeah, that would be nice. So people support this, but instead they're talking about, well, this is a bit of entertainment here.
It's lower under Trump than it was under Obama. So even if I were to take your argument, the U6 unemployment is lower. Number two.
Okay, point to Charlie Kirk, because he basically, first of all, that wasn't even an argument. That basically just flipped what he said. So at most you can draw. It's like drawing in chess, but no, you lose because it's actually lower. And again, you got to fact check Charlie Kirk, because he often says things and then you fact check it's actually not true. And on Twitter, sometimes he's like, communism killed 100 million people. And then next time he's like, 150 million people in the 20th century. It's like, dude, and he says things that contradict the other things, but you got to watch out for that. At the same time, you got to make actual arguments in a debate.
Two, we have more job openings than we have actually people to fill it. Because of that, we are seeing wages go up.
In some industries, we do have more job openings than we have people to fill it. I'd like to see what kind of jobs. Now, a lot of those jobs actually include, this is the funny thing, they include trucking and include riding a tractor and everything like that. and people aren't skilled enough sometimes to ride the tractor. There's a big emphasis on white collar jobs, which is another thing, by the way, with the lean in movement, and having when women want to make $1 on the dollar instead of 70 cents, which is, by the way, happening until they have children. Like they're making more. Unmarried women make more than men, than never married women. But the thing is that it's always in the direction of working for more corporations, spending more time at the office, right? And paleoconservatives, even like Tucker Carlson, would be like, no, like the American family is disintegrating because of capitalism in some way. Like he wrote a book actually recently. He's a kind of like a neo-Luddite where he's like, technology is making people work longer hours than ever and like they can't afford anything. Yeah. Like that's what capitalism does, right? It's Schumpeter's creative destruction, right? That's the whole thing where, you automate things to such a point where you don't need so many people anymore working. What are they going to do? And so you got to give everyone something, a UBI, universal health insurance, some sort of like safety net. And people say, by the way, hey, this is not fair. They didn't earn it. Why would I give these moochers anything, right? My hard-earned dollars. But here's the thing. You're living in a system which has essentially these dollars are themselves kind of virtual points, okay? This fiat currency is backed by nothing but the faith of the U.S. government, right? So accepting that we live in current society, okay, and you live in the 21st century, look what everything you're getting from you didn't live in the 15th century. You get all the science, you get all the benefit of children not dying, like 1 in 4 children. It was an insane mortality rate, right? The life expectancy has gone up tremendously, the average life expectancy as a result. The great medicine. Look, we've got air conditioning and cars. You think King Louis XIV had air conditioning? So the point is, you get free gifts all over the place by living in today, 21st century. You get free gifts by living in a very wealthy country, right? Where everyone's pretty well off. So those are free gifts you didn't earn, right? So what's wrong with everybody having a little bit of a free gift, right? By the fact that, of course, if you lived in the Roman times and you had the aqueducts, but you didn't have water coming to your house, right? So you would be worse off than today, right? But that's all you could have back then is public bathhouses. And that was good enough, right? But today, everyone expects kind of a minimum of like water going to their house and being drinkable and, inspected to make sure that there's not like killer bacteria in that water. In the same way, we want police, we want roads, and yes, maybe doctors and maybe teachers. Are there ways to have people compete, providers compete for vouchers, for, single payer, or even for cash, like with Andrew Yang? Yeah, that could be a real thing. But these services must be provided. Everyone must have something to pay for that schooling, right? So there should be competition, but there should also be this minimum that everybody has. You could call it whatever you want. And if you're able to work, sure. But what if you're not able to work? Or what if your job is actually not valued, like taking care of kids? Well, then you should lean in and go get that dollar. No, I would argue it's the men who should scale back and spend time with their kids and actually get 70 cents on the dollar. And both men and women should spend more time with their kids and elderly parents, right? That would be a society that might have actually less depression instead of sticking their kids in a public school like a daycare center and then both parents work. And they stick their parents in a nursing home and everyone gets medicated and the kids get the ADHD medication and the elderly get whatever medication that they get. And then the opioid crisis and the antidepressants. And then 1 in 4 women, middle-aged women is like antidepressants. This is a sick society in some way. And it needs to be, we really need to look at more than money. We need to look at human happiness, human health, and the psyche, right? The cultural psyche of our society. Paleoconservatives are much more in tune, actually, with this, in my opinion, than the neocons and people who only care about slashing taxes and growing the economy.
And I can prove it. So this is one of the most amazing statistics. Average income for under Bush, Obama, and Trump. So under 8 years of George W. Bush, average middle-class income, because you focus on middle-class earners, people that need money for an emergency, the backbone of our country, middle-class income went only $500 up under 8 years of President George W. Bush. It went up $1,000 over 8 years under Barack Obama. $5,000 in 2.5 years under President Donald Trump. $5,000.
Wow, that's staggering. I'd like to hear more about the interplay between that growth, or $5,000 in the pockets of middle-class Americans, versus what we see as unprecedented paycheck-to-paycheck living in the high standards. What is going on? Well, I think the rents have gone up a lot. But again, you need to plot the real wages on a curve and see what's been going on. And it seems that real wages have been stagnating. It's not just Donald Trump, right? Maybe Donald Trump will slightly make an uptick. But with automation and, outsourcing, we need a long-term plan. Maybe we need a UBI of $100 a month, right? Something in place. Another thing that UBI would do, by the way, is incentivize and align everyone, the population of America, of the United States, with whatever is being taxed, any Pigovian tax. A Pigovian tax is something where you're taxing something you want less of. So, for example, carbon taxes, right? There is currently something called carbon tax and dividend. It's a bipartisan bill in the Congress. Of course, Mitch McConnell would never allow a vote on it, probably. But the point is, it's a bipartisan bill, and if passed, it would tax carbon, so those carbon credits would actually be worth something, and at the same time, it would redistribute all that money, just like Alaska does, to every person equally, right? So unlike the French Yellow Vest protests, where the tax falls disproportionately on the working and middle class people, right, and lower class people who need to get to work in a car or whatever, it would be actually redistributed to the vast majority of people. So it would be a net gain for them. And they'd say, more carbon tax, please. And if we had that throughout the world, that kind of thinking, that we could actually redistribute Pigovian taxes to people, then we could reward things like reforestation. We could actually get Bolsonaro to see dollar bills, okay? Or basically, the Brazilian peso or whatever. It would be able to see, money in his eyes for saving the rainforest, right? Because they would look from space and they would measure and they would put it on a blockchain, maybe, like with the Nori project or the IBM's project. And they would literally confirm, okay, you've actually done reforestation. You know who's done that recently is India. I think the Philippines, but India for sure has done it. This is, it's interesting. There's other things China has done. They figured out how to grow stuff in the desert, which could become really important. But we need to start caring about the environment. Because again, look at Brazil. Bolsonaro gets into power. He decides that, hey, China isn't buying soy from the Americans. Oh, we've got a great opportunity. Let's give away the rainforest to soy farmers, right? Well, that's just going to destroy your whole ecosystem, dude. And he wants to, by the way, do a small, ethnic cleansing of the native population, which has been given tremendous tracts of land, right? Because all he sees is the economy. And that's the thing is everyone's affected by the net balance of trees on the earth or the biodiversity that comes out of rainforests. Similar things are happening in Africa and the Philippines, okay? We need to start putting money, a money value on reforestation and actually paying out to Brazil for having preserved their rainforest for this many years and to continue to do it. Because let's be reasonable. Our countries have decimated the forests in Europe and North America. So why shouldn't these countries decimate theirs and grow economically? We need to place a real price on our desire to conserve the ecosystems. And where's that money coming from? Well, of course, from the carbon credits, from our corporations, right? And how do we incentivize the population to agree to any of this? Well, we got a UBI where we can redistribute a lot of these taxes back to the people and have instead the sustainable electric cars and energy win for a change. Now, is that government picking winners and losers? Of course. It's penalizing the people taking the CO2 out of the ground and putting it eventually up in the atmosphere. It's putting a cost on cutting down the last tree, hunting down the last animal, fishing out the last fish, and introducing all sorts of things that destroy marine environments and everything like that. Yeah, there should be a cost to that. Instead, it's the ultimate corporate welfare to make it totally free to rape the environment and then make a $1 burger with your, factory farms. But meanwhile, the cows are kept in horrific conditions. But there's more milk now, and they're trying to figure out how to sell even more milk. So that's the problem. If you're not paying, then you're probably the product. Whether you're an inmate in a prison or whether you're a cow who's giving milk, or whether you're a fish that's being fished. And the thing is that we haven't figured out as humanity how to grow up and play nice and play sustainably in our little planet over here.
These are middle-class folks. So, Kyle, you're going to find agreement that people are indeed still trying to get ahead in America. I'm not going to say we're living through perfection, but boy, has President Donald Trump created the best economy in American history, especially for middle-class earners. And I'll say, you mentioned the working poor. So how does one help the working poor?
Okay, so yeah, I'll give this one so far to Mr. Kirk over here because, the economy is definitely doing really well in general. He's made some points to rebut what Kyle said exactly to his points, which I like, meaning the middle class, the ones you're talking about, they're actually going up. And Kyle made kind of a weak point when he just said, well, why don't you say they both suck? Dude, that's just a draw at best. And that's really not even the case. Obama rescued us from an actual, when I say rescued, he didn't do anything so stupid, right, to get us into a depression. He helped the economy get back on track, and it's been growing. That credit to him, right? All Donald Trump has done is inherit a good economy and make it even better. That's not as hard to do. That's like becoming a CEO of a multi-million-dollar company and make it grow even faster. Getting to that million from zero or from a negative, from debt is actually pretty amazing. That's what Steve Jobs did with Apple, right? So I would say Steve Jobs versus Tim Cook, they don't equally suck. Steve Jobs was way better than Tim Cook, but Apple's growing even faster under Tim Cook in terms of revenues. But dude, Steve Jobs rescued the whole company. So yeah, I don't think I like Kyle, but he didn't do a good job with this particular round.
Is it by taking money from job creators and entrepreneurs and risk takers? You might say yes. I would say no. That's the best way to help people that honestly need the help in our society. And President Donald Trump has demonstrated this is through a robust and booming economy. And that's why one of the most...
Hold on a second. I agree it's from a robust and booming economy. That's a tautology, and there's a booming economy, then yeah, of course, all entrepreneurs and everybody wins. But here's the thing. I'm an entrepreneur, okay? I have a startup, and I can tell you, and I've been on TV where I've been interviewed by the most conservative people. For example, I've been on Newsmax TV, right? I've been invited, and I was the lone, sort of left-leaning guy there. And they asked me, okay, what do you think of Donald Trump's tax cuts? What do you think of Republican tax cuts? And they called it the Trump tax cut. And I say, look, do you like it? And I say, look, I'm an entrepreneur, right? When I go and I try to raise money for my startup, right? And small businesses are like the 98% of businesses in America or whatever. I'm going to try to raise money. Do you think I can just go ahead and say, hey, Mr. So-and-so investor, you just got a tax break. Can you share some of that money with me? Right? And they all laughed actually, on the show. I think I still have it somewhere. And basically, and I said, the backbone of America, for me, my customers, right, are the everyday people who are living to paycheck. If they have disposable income, then they will spend on my product. What investors are looking for is demand, right? For my, whatever it is that I'm building as an entrepreneur. Then they'll give me money whether or not their taxes are being cut. If anything, that will be a tax write-off for them, right? A lot of the times, the capital gains tax today is actually pretty low. So investors are in fact incentivized to invest. So that, that's actually a valid point. However, the income tax used to be lower than the capital gains tax, right? Because people would actually be incentivized to hire workers. Today, they're incentivized to sort of do these financial transactions where the financial sector wins over time because of the lower, because of that thing that happened during Reagan time. So anyways, I would like to see sort of a trickle-up economy where everyone's got a little bit of money and they buy the Gillette razors. And if I have a good product, they're going to start buying my product. And then investors are going to come in. I'm confident like that. I don't want a handout from investors because they happen to have more money in their pocket and so they can gamble more with it. What are they really going to do with it if they have $10 billion and next year they have $11 billion? Look, I'm sure whatever they do is going to be essentially the decision of themselves, one person, or however much staff there is. In a free market, it's going to be millions of people making decisions. All I need is to attract 100 of those people, prove out my product, get to the next 1,000 people, and the next 10,000 people. That's the economy I'd like to see. I don't want to see one guy like Jeff Bezos deciding, okay, I'm going to fund you. I mean, sure, I'll take Jeff Bezos' money, but I'm just saying that's more of a nepotism type economy. And that's kind of what we're seeing with the Princeton study. It says we're a plutocracy. There's not really a democracy. Democracy is also with your wallet, right? It's what you're trying to buy and do. It's a different kind of democracy, one that conservatives like. But you need people to have money in the first place to make that vote with their wallet. Otherwise, the vote is totally massively skewed to the moneyed interests. And whether that vote is with their wallet or later with, speech, as they call it, or whatever, or political lobbying.
Most amazing statistics is the pop.
Oh, and by the way, I happen to convince the guys at Newsmax. They said, you actually make a good point. that cutting the taxes for the working poor, as Obama tried to do with the payroll tax cut, actually boost the economy. Yeah, no shit.
Poverty rate, I mentioned that. The black poverty rate is the lowest it has ever been. Poverty is a holistic measurement of income, of debt, of likelihood to graduate high school. The entire picture, it's the lowest it's ever been.
I like Charlie Kirk, with the massive caveat that what he's saying is true. I'll just assume throughout this debate what he's saying is true. Sorry if it's not. Then, this guy's winning this round, pretty much hands down. And this guy, I think he's kind of bored. I don't know what he's doing.
In recorded history in the black community. And that's something really to be said, Kyle.
I don't play identity politics, so don't bring up black or Asian. Just tell me what the actual rate is.
Okay, wow, points to Kyle. It's interesting. I don't play identity politics either, but I like how he is straightforward about that. He's on the left, right? So he's going to get a lot of identitarian left people going come on, Kyle, come on. This is a real thing, right? And look, it may be a real thing, but the way we're going to solve it, sometimes there's neutral solutions like body cameras for cops, right? That could be better than solutions which, sure, acknowledge that there's white privilege and black privilege and white and men's privilege and women's privilege and prerogative. But at the end of the day, we need to solve real problems. So I like points to Kyle for saying that. Again, I'm center left. I just want to say that it almost makes him sound like a Ben Shapiro guy over here. I wonder what, and it's almost like their roles have been reversed. Let's see what this guy woke up. Let's see what's happening.
So how about this? How about urban unemployment is the lowest it's ever been.
That's another word for
Are you kidding me? Okay, it's like a dog whistle unemployment. Come on. No, but to be fair, I still give this one to Charlie on the actual substance, right? That was a nice, I don't belong to the group that talks about groups. But yeah, still. Okay, so slight point in terms of rhetoric, most points in terms of substance, with the massive caveat that he's not making stuff up to just to win on substance.
That's a statement. That's a statement. You want to say don't want to play identity politics? Perfectly fine. These are numbers that are, by the way, published by the Congressional Budget Office. These are numbers. And by the way, Kyle, I look forward to you now supporting the complete and total deletion of the Congressional Black Caucus now that you're on record saying that you don't like identity politics. So.
Okay, actually, fair point over there. Why isn't there a congressional? I don't know. It's not even enough Chinese, I guess, to be in a caucus. But seriously, yeah, I think we need to start. Well, this is my own view. It seems to be shared by these two gentlemen here. That we need to start getting away from making race more of an issue. We need to start making race less of an issue. And I feel like that the current conservatives, in some way, are more aligned with that agenda, with the people in the 60s who were like I would say like Martin Luther King, who would want to actually look at the character of a man or a woman instead of the color of their skin. And that's the point. It's not to say that there isn't a reality, but to point it out constantly doesn't help, perhaps, as much as solving problems together. There's not a black America. There is not a white America. There's the United States of America. Remember that?
Because you brought that up. If free people want to associate and form whatever groups they want, that's perfectly fine.
If free people want to reference statistics, they should be able to use whatever statistics they want.
Let me just say, the only thing I'll say in response to what you said is you like to bring up the average number. Jeff Bezos and I have an average net worth of $50 billion.
Oh, point, slam.
I'll let you finish what you're saying.
Very good point, Kyle. We should be talking about median numbers, especially if the curve starts, if most of the wealth goes to the top. Okay, think about this mathematically, right? The Piketty thing is right. And most of the wealth is being captured by the top, which staggering statistic, okay? How many trillions of dollars have gone to the top? Maybe like $27 trillion since, the top being like top, 10%, I don't know. Over the last 30 years, the bottom, no, I'm sorry. It's like this, I think. The bottom 50% got, $500 billion increase. That's it. Something like that. $500 billion with the trickle-down economics, the deregulation, the lower rates. So it's a bit like communism. Like if you just keep doubling down, we haven't reached the true free market yet. One day we'll all, reverse, and finally the people on the bottom will have more of the global share of the economy. Like if that's true, if those statistics, I mean, we could look it up. $500 billion, trillions of dollars percent global wealth over the last few decades. I might not be able to see it now, but hey, the richest 1% now owns half the world's wealth. So probably that is not too far off of what I'm saying. The system doesn't work for everybody when some people see $27 trillion worth of gains and other people see a 500 billion. I could have the number slightly wrong, but the point is that we need to look at the median. Okay, so mathematically, if that is being skewed so much, right, the wealth is being skewed so much, the average is going to keep going up, right? The average, even though for the majority of people, it hasn't gone up very much at all. So this is a very important thing. Yes, medians, please, not averages.
Then we'll go to Kyle. So you mentioned the tax cut, which I'm really,
he should really, I think he should really go into more detail on it. I'm almost going to he makes that zinger, and Kyle, you're about to win on substance. Please talk about the averages, put some meat on it, how people, aren't making enough in the bottom, whatever, fine. Let's listen to it again. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps you will know what he's talking about.
The complete and total deletion of the Congressional Black Caucus now that you're on record saying that you don't like identity politics. So, if free people want to
because you brought that up. If free people want to associate and form whatever groups they want, that's perfectly fine.
If free people want to reference statistics, they should be able to use whatever statistics they want.
Let me just say, the only thing I'll say in response to what you said is you like to bring up the average number. Jeff Bezos and I have an average net worth of $50 billion.
All right, fine. If there was a mic to drop, he could drop it here. Like in movie sins, I'm going to give I'm going to take off a lot of sins. This was good.
I'll let you finish what you were saying, and then we'll go to Kyle. So you mentioned the tax cut, which I'm really happy to talk about. 22 million families, so over 80 million Americans have an extra $1,000 in their pocket this year.
I'm going to speed this up. I'm going to let these guys talk. I'm sorry. I was giving my ideas too much. I'm just going to let these guys talk. Go ahead.
Thanks to the largest middle-class tax cut in American history. This is one of the most misrepresented pieces of legislation in our country's history. I could listen to the Democrats time and time again say this just was a handout for corporations and a handout for the richest of these. That is correct. This is the largest, most successful middle-class tax cut in American history.
fact, the middle class paid $91 billion more this year than last year, and the tax cut was about $91 billion for the richest 5%. I'm not sure again with the percentiles, but again, this was seemingly one group paid less in $91 billion, and one group paid more in $91 billion, and that second group was the middle class. So I don't know, but maybe everyone's better off. It's a wash. You could argue that the economy was better, so maybe it's actually better for everybody. And that's why the government got net zero revenues. And with all that, they're in $1 trillion of deficit. Anyway, continue.
In fact, a family of four with an annual income of $73,000, which is the median family income in America, saw a tax cut of more than $2,000, a 58% reduction in taxes, thanks to President Donald J. Trump. And so you care about middle class workers. I care about...
Okay, so that may be all true at the same time. So that's good. If the economy went up and the tax cuts actually were a tax cut for the middle class, but explain to me how there was 91% more raised from the middle class and 91% less raised from the top 5%, say, if the top 5% still made even more money that year. So I think that the tax curve was definitely skewed towards the middle class more. But whatever, if everyone wins, I'm still happy. So this is a wash for me. It doesn't really matter. Again, I just want more money to be put in the hands of everyday Americans, whether it's a safety net or a UBI or universal health insurance or something.
Middle class workers. President Donald Trump has actually delivered results and success for the people that we care about, the middle part of this country that trusted them with their vote for the first time in a long time. I'm so proud that this president is able to say, I've made life better for people that both parties have turned their back on for so long.
Okay, so here we go.
Well, that's good. It's positioning him as a populist who's like Bernie, who's going to look out for the regular people of America. Frankly, I believe in 2016, every poll showed that Bernie trounces Trump by sometimes double digits in those Rust Belt states, whereas there was no other alternative. Hillary just wasn't even talking about these people. So I don't know whether they would have elected Trump if Bernie was on the ticket. However, Trump did come through for many of those people, and many of those people he did not come through for. If you go and you find those people and talk to them, and they're like, yeah, our town is still jobless, right? Because you can't bring the manufacturing jobs home permanently unless it's gone to robots. You can't bring the coal jobs back. Even Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to laugh at you for that. So yeah, a lot of it is smoke and mirrors, and there's a lot of forgotten people in this country. And in 2020, you're going to know because they're going to vote, and let's see how they vote. That's going to be the referendum on whether those people have actually been helped by Mr. Donald Trump.
So if you want the truth about that tax cut bill, let's talk about it. First of all, will I give credit in certain areas? Absolutely, because I'm not a hack. So when it comes to, I'm not saying you are, by the way, I'm just saying that I'm not one. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, so first of all, he's not a hack. He's absolutely consistent. He gives credit to the other people. That's really good. I don't always agree with him on every position he takes, but I admire his consistency, just as I admire the consistency of Bernie or Ron Paul, etc. And he's not a hack, and he's careful to say he's not a hack. So overall, good. Continue.
So the good parts of that bill, the child tax credit went from $1,000 to $2,000. That's something we can agree on. Good. That's a good thing. The standard deduction was increased. That's a good thing as well. By the way, I like how we're both super tall and these mics are so low. It's so awkward.
It's got to be like the presidential,
Okay. All right, so now let's get into it.
I wonder if these guys will ever run.
That's the good part. That's the stuff I agree with. Here's the bad part, okay? In 1952, the corporate tax rate, it accounted for 33% of all federal tax revenue. Okay, you understand that? So the corporate tax accounted for 33% of all federal tax revenue.
He's looking down. He's reading it off the notes. That's cool. He's drinking his little bottle of water here. And that's a good point he's about to make, I believe.
Today, corporate taxes only bring in about 8% of that federal revenue. So that means a giant tax cut for corporations. Trump looked at that and said, we should give them a bigger cut. So the rate went from 35% to 21%. That cost more than $1.3 trillion. Also, this bill scrapped a little thing called the alternative minimum tax. So what that means is that if there's a rich person who's got a team of lobbyists and a team of accountants trying to help them dodge taxes, okay? Let's say they get that rate down to 14%, their effective rate. The alternative minimum tax says, no, you have to pay a minimum of 25%. You can't deduct below that 25% number. This bill got rid of that because it wants the ultra-rich to take all the money and run out the back door.
Well, there's also the fact that the IRS can't even afford to audit the ultra-rich because they have an army of lawyers and the accountants, and they're going to put up a great fight. And the IRS has admitted, being, kind of scaled back and defunded under Trump's administration, that they have the resources to go after the poorer people. So again, I remember when Charlie Kirk and others were upset that the IRS is targeting conservatives more than Democrats for certain things in audits. Today, the IRS can't even afford audits if you're very rich, but it can certainly afford them in the case that you're very poor. especially if you take the earned income tax credit. So again, that's another factor that's not even related to the tax cut, is actually cutting the enforcement, the ability of the IRS to handle all these things. Similarly, when you're on the border and you're cutting the ability of the border security guards to handle the amount of people coming in, you're going to get prioritization. You're going to get different problems over there. So there's not easy things to solve, except to say that maybe, just maybe, you should be using more tax dollars to fund the very agency that collects the taxes. Gee, what a thought.
This bill was not for helping the rich. And why is it that they took the estate tax, which only applies to people with goddamn estates, and they said, hey, $5.5 million is the line. How about we make that $11 million? So in other words, a tax that only impacted the rich, he said, well, let's cut that one quite a bit as well.
Well, we know why. Because those rich have a long way to trickle down. They're going to create 1 million jobs. That triangle, that pyramid, is going to be really wide at the base. And eventually, the guys making Jeff Bezos' golden toilets are going to hire people like secretaries that are going to get the orders for Jeff Bezos' golden toilets. Except it doesn't actually work that way sometimes. Sometimes that money just goes, it's stashed in the Cayman Islands, of course, if the taxes are too high. And other times it does attract other people's capital to come to the United States. And I don't know whether the estate law requires you to be a citizen or not. But if it doesn't, we're attracting more capital. The question is, does it trickle down, or does it create more of a plutocracy? So, yeah, these are systemic issues. If you look at just one number, the GDP, it's going to keep going up. The question is, how does the average person's life, how does the median person's life affected by these policies?
And furthermore, and the most important point about this bill is that people making $75,000 a year or less will actually see a tax increase over a decade. So what happened was all of the tax cuts for regular people, all the tax cuts for you.
I don't know if all these people clapping actually know these facts. Now, I've not seen Kyle really intentionally misrepresent facts. So to be honest, I'm way more giving him the benefit of the doubt whenever he states facts. But I don't know if these people know these facts. You're clapping like, yeah, man, thank you for mentioning that fact that we all knew. But no, they're just clapping because they're fans of him. I like that, but I'm just saying, I'm trying to stick to substance most of the time here.
They're temporary, but the tax cuts for corporations and the rich, they're permanent.
Major important point, right? You need to talk about the structural reality and basically effects of your taxes. Things that are permanent leave a lasting effect on the American economy. Sure, you could do a quick sugar high for people. So anyway, great point to Kyle in this exchange. I think he, so far, has the upper hand.
In the context, because we're going to stay on the economy, you've both addressed a lot of the key points. But one point
you don't even need to be here. We can just keep going.
Yeah, one point we did not address is the deficits and the debt. So if you can just address that in your response.
I mean, you're going to find no disagreement that the debt and deficit is one of the most urgent issues of our time. And look, President Trump has submitted budget after budget to Congress that would balance over 5 to 10 years. And look, Kyle will and I will agree on this. One of the ways.
By the way, see that I like. He's being consistent. You won't get any disagreement here, but of course you'll get disagreement from guys like Rush Limbaugh, who was a huge deficit hawk for years, and then under Trump he's like, oh, deficits don't matter. Deficits don't matter anymore. Just like channeling Dick Cheney. Dude, Ronald Reagan was right when he said deficits don't matter, said Cheney. Like there are so many conservatives that just flip, like the non-Paul Ryan ones, right? So there was the paleos, then there was the fiscal conservatives, and now you've got more of like the alt-right type of wing of the party as well. But he's still he's like a fiscal conservative, and I don't think he's a paleo. So it's interesting to hear. He's like the Paul Ryan type wing of the party.
Is that we can balance our budget as ending these silly and reckless and morally objectionable foreign occupations of countries that we should be in. We can agree on this. And by the way, two things to this. Done with an elite force of foreign fighters, thanks to President Trump's asymmetrical foreign policy. The leader of ISIS is dead in the last 24 hours. That's the thing that we should applaud. And by the way, that was done with an elite fighting force, no need for a foreign occupation. We can both applaud, the death.
I agree with everything he said. I also agree with Trump when he said, "Oh, Obama, give him credit for making the call." I don't know. I give credit to the people who actually found the guy, and people who were hunting him and staying, and risking their lives, being double agents and everything. I credit those guys making the call to take out the guy that what else are you going to do? So I agree with Trump there, but I also agree with old Trump who said, okay, obviously Obama's going to do that. So I don't give much credit to Trump to saying, okay, yeah, you could totally take out that guy. No problem. I think honestly, I'm not even going to go into Trump's knowledge or lack thereof of different things in foreign policy, but him disengaging with the Kurds, he actually likes the cutting and running. I like not getting in there in the first place, right? And he likes that too. But once you're in there, the only thing worse than getting into somewhere you're not supposed to be and having to lead in that region, which is translated as like have a serious presence in every single major decision. The only thing that's worse than that is just abandoning people. So look at Libya, right? We got in there, we got Gaddafi out, and then we're like, peace out. And then, listen, our State Department gets attacked, and 4 people die, which is tragic, right? But why aren't millions of people tragic? Why isn't a failed state tragic? It is tragic. It is an embarrassment to the international community of abandoning Libya, right? And even before this happened, they withdrew resources from the State Department, which maybe they shouldn't have done that. You got Jason Chaffetz admitting to that in the past. Look at Iraq, okay? Yeah, we went in there. We took Saddam out. And the number of suicide bombings went from 0 to thousands, right? Are people better off? In Afghanistan, we helped to get the Russians out. We helped the native population, with a lot of Afghan Arabs, obviously, people coming from all over the place, funded by Saudis. And so we funded them as well. And we funded the Mujahideen, right? We got the people out. And then we're like, okay, peace out. And then we got, Al-Qaeda, right? I'm not saying we should stay there in Afghanistan for 17 or 19 years. Here's the thing, right? We're doing the same things as the Russians that the Soviets back then, they were called. We got them out. They were propping up a secular government. We were propping up a secular government. They were spending oodles of money. We're spending oodles of money. They were fighting Islamists. We're fighting Islamists, right? Except those Islamists are not the same Islamists. And the Taliban is a different type of organization. It's not necessarily out to destroy America or anything like that. And neither were the Mujahideen, by the way. But the point is that there's ways to disengage that are smart. And when he just tweets the disengagement and his general quits over it, and then just like after the Gulf War, we abandoned the Kurds, and then Saddam gasses the Kurds in this case, what happened was, thankfully, the vacuum was filled by Russia. And Putin basically sat down with Erdogan and said, okay, this is like, we're going to stabilize Syria, because Syria is Russia's ally. We shouldn't have gotten involved in the first place. Syria does not present any threat to the United States. I agree with Rand Paul. I agree with libertarians and people who say, Tulsi, say we shouldn't be in these regime change wars. But if we already have allies, we should essentially have disengaged in a smarter way, not given a green light in different ways to Turkey to say, okay, well, now you can go and genocide the Kurds a little bit. Yes, there's the PKK. Yes, the Peshmerga obviously, has weapons. Same thing could be said of Hezbollah, okay, who helped on the other side in Syria. They have a lot of weapons, right? In general, I mean, this is a utopian, we're not ready for this yet as a human society, maybe. There should be an international police. There should be a world police, but it shouldn't be one country's, troops or bases. The United States has 800 bases around the world. The rest of the world has what? 30. All combined, all nations combined. The United States spends way more than the next, I think, 19 countries combined. And some of them many of them are allies. Most of them are allies. So when conservatives say we can't afford universal health care and Denmark can because they're not paying for their protection, I say, is that America first? Like Donald Trump said that we're getting ripped off, etc., right? So why don't we actually disengage, but not like right away creating a vacuum, but like, what is going to fill the vacuum, in my opinion, should be an international organization. Yes, UN peacekeepers. Yes, observers, but also observers and peacekeepers with teeth. Okay, like in South Lebanon, where they had the war with Israel, Lebanon. There's like occupation of Lebanon, and then Israel left Lebanon. They put peacekeepers from every country there, right? I'm not saying that. So here's my utopian idea. Okay, is every country is going to gradually disarm in favor of an international police force, an international army force, and the only job of that force will be to de-escalate every conflict, regardless of who's at fault. De-escalate. No one else has weapons. They de-escalate all sectarian fighting and force people to use courts and diplomacy. And if there's fighting, they just come in there and they literally de-escalate, and they're trained in that. Now, there is a danger that this organization has so many weapons that it could literally dictate, go beyond its mandate. And the best laid plans of mice and men, they say, right? The same thing with the U.S. government. They try to put as many safeguards and checks and balances. So that is a danger. But one has to wonder if we could solve that, or at least try to have a system like that. It would be like disarming everybody in Britain and then having only a few cops have guns, right? You don't need that many guns. You don't need that many nuclear weapons to de-escalate conflicts. So I think in the future, we might ideally have sort of a neutral international rotating police force with a lot of rotating peacekeepers but we're not there yet. And so we have, unfortunately, a lot of sectarian and nationalistic violence in the world.
Of an ISIS leader that was totally
But far less than in the 20th century and previous centuries.
being completely evil. And so look, the debt deficit, I'll tell you, we need dramatic spending cuts, and we need to shrink the size and scope of government. We can talk about that at length. I think we're here to more talk about things that are happening in real time with President Donald Trump. I want to make 3 points about what Kyle said about the tax bill. Number one, Republicans in Congress tried to make the tax cuts permanent, and the Democrats objected to it, they filibustered it, and they never allowed it to happen. That's number one. So I agree that the tax cuts were not permanent for the middle-income workers, but it was the Democrats that prevented it from actually becoming...
This is one of those things where I'm a little dubious if he's saying the truth. It sounds like a Charlie Kirk type of hyperbole. But hey, if it is true, as I said would be my rule, then I guess, Kyle, what happened? Why did the Democrats do that, man?
permanent in the last 18 months. Number two, you talk about corporate tax rates and the percentage of the budget. Well, for those of us...
Just by the way, I've been there when Obama tried to make a payroll tax cut, just something to relieve the workers. And you'd think that like Republicans never saw a tax cut they didn't like. No, Fox News was on all day talking about he's cutting taxes, but they're not job creators. These people aren't job creators. Why is he cutting payroll tax? Literally. So it's not just one party that like doesn't want to cut taxes. It's specifically people who are like, it's common when a lot of people are willing to violate like a larger principle in order to get what they want. Like conservatives, when they allow Donald Trump to take eminent domain of people along the southern border to build his wall, because they'll get the wall. Never mind the fact that big government is coming in there and taking eminent domain. That is something they'll put up with if they get something else they want. So yeah, I guess that's a sign of pragmatism, but you shouldn't claim that you're a party of principle if you have so much pragmatism that you're willing to go back on pretty much every like the principle of giving emergency powers to the president to build the wall. Where have I seen that before? Giving emergency powers to the chancellor. I mean, supreme leader. I mean, the president, right? That nothing could ever go wrong with that. And under false pretenses of an invasion, like there have been larger invasions in the past which didn't need emergency powers. So if something's going on for a long time and we can handle it, pretty sure not an emergency. And so you shouldn't be giving emergency powers. You should be very careful about emergency powers to the executive branch because don't you believe in limited government? Don't you believe in limiting the power, especially of the executive branch? Because that's the one with the army. That's the one with all the executive power, right? So you want checks and balances, right? You like your constitution. So then why are you sacrificing those principles just so you can get the wall? Perhaps you can get the wall without sacrificing your principles. I think that would be very commendable. I'm not saying principles are in and of themselves great. I think Hitler had principles and Mussolini had less principles and Stalin had principles and whatever. But it's like these principles in themselves can lead to putting people ideology over pragmatism, over people's lives. Even the freedom ideology of like, well, if people got to die. They don't have enough money. Too bad. I'm not taxing anybody. That would be theft. Like too much principle could be bad. But I'm just trying to say that like, don't think conservatives are all principled because they're willing to bend their own principles in even the biggest like type things, like giving emergency powers to the, to the president to, I don't know, put up, internment camps, where they hold children. I don't know. I wouldn't like FDR doing it. I wouldn't like Trump doing it. So that's just my sensibilities, but I think most liberals would agree with me.
For us that understand and have studied the Laffer curve, we're actually seeing revenues go up. We have record numbers of revenues in the federal government go up because...
And why is the deficit growing?
Oh, this guy did a whole thing on the Laffer curve.
Well, it's going because we're also increasing spending on ridiculous foreign occupation wars, something that I'm against. Okay, so we'll agree on. We're increasing spending, but we're also cutting taxes, so I'm a big...
I'm not sure we're only increasing spending on foreign occupation wars. How many wars is Donald Trump really engaged in? That's one thing I actually like about Donald Trump, is that by one very, very important metric, perhaps one of the most important metrics behind, world ecosystems. The metric is the amount of people dying around the planet due to the decisions of a president. Actually, Trump compares much more favorably, against Obama and against Bush, certainly Bush. I would say Clinton is even better than Trump, right? For example, in Libya, when we went into Libya and then it's now a hellhole, right? That was not a good nation building exercise. Versus Bill Clinton with Yugoslavia, okay, and the whole civil war there. They replaced Milosevic, but the government remained intact. So compare Serbia today with Libya. Okay, having said that though, I do want to point out that our country is supplying arms, billions of dollars in arms, to a regime and a coalition, Saudi Arabia, UAE, everything, that bombs the shit out of Yemen. And there's 1 million people in there at least that are, suffering from cholera, and just unsanitary conditions, and it's pretty terrible. Like if you, Kyle, are upset at what Israel is doing, let's say, okay, that is just the scope of that versus what Saudi are doing right now is just night and day. So what I'm basically saying to you is, we are in fact supporting regimes. In fact, Trump seems to have sort of an affinity almost to people who have some sort of authoritarian streak, whether it's Duterte, who got elected saying he's going to kill 100,000 people as his pledge, or Bolsonaro, who said he's going to, in Brazil, ethnically cleanse and take away, not an inch of the rainforest will be safe from loggers and everything, will be given to the natives, or whether it's the Kims. Trump seems to cozy up, or with Erdogan, perhaps to some extent, or with, I have to say, in China, Xi Jinping, okay, president for life. Trump really kind of liked that. He didn't say anything negative about stuff like that. So Trump almost likes authoritarian guys who run countries the same way that, CEOs run companies, perhaps. CEO for life. Ain't that something? So I wonder, but Trump actually does, cozy up to those people. So that's a minus for him. But in terms of like specifically his orders, his actions, killing people around the world, he's probably killed less people around the world than like most presidents in modern history. And so you got to give him that.
Believer that we should cut taxes and cut government. So if you're going to, my philosophy is quite consistent. I think that it's better to get people's money when they earn it. It's not government's money to take it. But the second thing I want to make is that the corporate tax rate, as it was lowered, so it was lowered from 38% to about 22%, we're actually seeing compliance go up. So you cited the 1950s. So the 1950s tax rate was marginally ineffective, two different things, but it was over 90%, right? And
No, I'm talking about the corporate tax. I wasn't talking.
Yeah, let's be honest here. He's trying to diffuse what he's saying, but his diffusion doesn't work. He's talking about, yes, the marginal tax rate versus the effective tax rate. Now there's more compliance, and now more companies are paying the smaller tax rate, and so you're getting more companies complying. But he has said that taking all of that into account, the overall amount of money that the federal government got from corporations was much higher than today. So these are apples and oranges, and really these oranges are not addressing these apples at all. So let's see what Kyle says.
Talking about the marginal tax rate.
oh, you're not into it. Okay, I stand corrected. Then the corporate tax is about 40%.
He tries sometimes to do this kind of thing. He doesn't actually address what he's saying. I'm saying not just with Kyle. I've seen him do this with Sam Cedar. We kind of says something related and hopes that is related enough to actually be the thing to address the thing, but it's sometimes not the thing.
50% in the 1950s. But
Right, it accounted for 33% of all federal tax rates.
right. So now
That's the point. Accounted for 33%.
we don't have the numbers yet in, but it was 8% last year. It's projected to exceed over 13 to 15% because now corporations are complying with the actual federal tax rates, because that's what happens when you lower the tax rates. Less people put their.
Okay, fine. So this actually does address. He's basically saying, look, whatever happened in the past, now the corporations are paying X. And by lowering the tax rates, we believe that we're going to get more revenue from the corporation, which is fair. It could happen. He invokes the Laffer curve. That's kind of laughable. Kidding. But yes, I mean, even Art Laffer himself did not fully flesh out what he's saying. He just drew it on a napkin, and then people kind of talked about it. Anyone, the Laffer curve, where is that peak is usually people have found empirically around 60%. That you start getting less revenue, meaning it's already uncomfortable for the company at 40 and 50%, but you're going to get even more revenue, as uncomfortable as it is for the company. But then at some point it starts going down. People have found out it's not anywhere close to 15%. It's more close to 60% on the Laffer curve. So even with the Laffer curve, even Art Laffer himself, would have to kind of raise an eyebrow and say, really? Should corporations really pay only 10% of the federal tax, considering how much of the economy they underpin?
Money overseas, and more people comply with the actual laws on the books. The third thing, I want to get this philosophy really quick.
Respond just real quick. The effective rate went from 23% to 12%, so that's not true. The effective rate went down in bottles.
Corporation or individual?
Corporate.
12%.
Did he actually just, okay, so it's a battle of the facts. And when that happens, I would typically give it to Kyle, because whatever, I've just seen the Twitter feed of this guy, and sometimes he just makes stuff up. So let's see how he handles that. Fact check.
For corporate tax rate?
Body check.
Yes, the effective corporate tax rate went from 23% to 12%.
It should be 0%. Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
So, a very unpopular position. Please proceed.
It should be 0%. Yes. Okay. So keep in mind, also he lost, and then he just moves to something else, red herring, and now it's exciting. Let's talk about that. Which is, by the way, I'd love to hear about the 0%, because when Ben Shapiro said to Cenk, "What's your thing? 100%?" And Cenk should be like, "Well, what's yours? 0%?" And then they can have an actual conversation. So let's go.
Elaborate on it. This is a bigger philosophical point. And this is where Kyle and I will find no agreement whatsoever, respectfully. Is it our money or is it government's money? And that's a really important discussion to have, because you frame this as the creation of wealth is somewhat of a bad thing. I'm not going to...
Just as a small point, it is the government's money. They print it, they confiscated all the gold, and now it's not even tied to gold. So literally, it is backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. You're literally using fiat currency that is literally legal tender for all debts, public and private. So if there's a debt that's created, the government comes and prints that money, and that money is accepted in every court. If you give that money, then that debt is settled. Okay, that is how that legal tender laws work. And so yes, it is the government's money, actually. Now, having said that, there's other assets in the world besides the government's money. Not everyone's holding greenbacks and dollars. There's bitcoins, okay? There are computers, there's apples, there's commodities, there's real estate, there's privately issued money by banks. It's not even the government's money. 90% of our money supply is issued by private banks. So we're not even talking, there's a very simplistic thing of like, whose money is it? Well, we have these institutions called banks, and we trust them to issue the money so we can transact. And so they put a price on the money, and that's called interest, right? Because their credit's better than yours. And people trust to take their money rather than your personal IOU. That's a short primer. But then those banks can get a run on the banks, and so you need a lender of last resort. Or if you don't, then you have to discount their money by essentially their credit rating, and you have to, nowadays we might be able to do that. We might have some credit ratings, whatever. But to keep things simple, $1 is $1, whether it's issued by Wells Fargo credit card or it's issued by Visa, or whatever, Bank of America. And it's $1 is $1 because there is a lender of last resort, which is the U.S. federal banking system, which consists of various large banks. And they're the ones that do the ACH processing. Okay. So that federal credit banking system is the one that's responsible also for buying the treasuries that the Treasury issues, the IOUs of the government. And the government uses that to fund itself just as much as it uses printing money, to give, okay, if it prints money, what do you think happens to that money? That's very interesting too. There's all these complex things that happen with this money. So the money is printed and it replaces the old money. Some of it is worn out and can't be used anymore, right? Some of it is just replaced with like old dollars and new dollars. But sometimes, you're not borrowing, but you need to cover the giant debt. The government's going to print more money. So whose money is it that that's going to be floating around? Moreover, you say it's your money. You say you earned it. You built it, right? Well, you didn't build what Newton and Galileo and, Pasteur discovered. You didn't build all the wealth creation in the last few centuries and thousands of years. That's free for you. So like I said, if you have a free gift, why not let someone else have a free gift? Yeah. And maybe that does come with, you can think of taxes another way. You can think of taxes as a cost of doing business in a certain jurisdiction. Say you go to Disney World and you'd like to set up shop and you'd like to have a store. You're a vendor. You'd like to situate yourself in the Six Flags or Disney World. I think every conservative and libertarian say, sure, you should pay taxes to Disney World, right? But what is Disney World? Disney World is a corporately owned city, right? That is basically situated on land that Walt Disney secretly bought over time and then built a theme park in it. So that is enough of an I built it story that libertarians, even anarcho-capitalists, would be like, sure, yeah, that city should totally be able to charge rent and send men with guns to evict you if you don't pay the rent. Okay, cool. Well, next door is like Boca Raton, Florida, right? Also a city that was built by a developer. Also a city that was eventually kind of given over or through bankruptcy or whatever to the people living there and like the council, right? So who owns it? Well, the people living there. So it's a democratically owned city. And so if you situate your little restaurant in Boca, then it's like paying taxes to the city is the same as paying rent to the city. You understand? It's like, if you don't like it, just go to another city. So on the city level, I think I've had libertarians like agree, like, okay, taxes and rent are pretty much equivalent. I could see how, a city can be owned by its own, like, citizens in a democratic way, right? And that's why they have, like, rent control laws, is what I said before. And they try to keep outsiders from, like, messing up their house prices and everything. So if you think of it that way, then whose money is it? Well, it's the city, it's charging you rent. Same way the United States is, like, charging companies. Maybe they shouldn't have an income tax for individuals. Fine. Maybe they shouldn't have a wealth tax. Those things didn't work, actually. They were repealed in some countries. But they could have a corporate tax. They could have a tax for any kind of business that creates a taxable nexus in the country. And why would the business still be there? Well, because of all the other reasons on the other side. Maybe the population's educated. Maybe the roads are good. Maybe there's safety. Maybe there are good laws in favor of businesses. Maybe it's a movie industry and there's a lot of infrastructure and people. Maybe it's the software industry. So that's what happens. That's why taxes exist. And the cities, as long as you get your head around the fact that things can be owned democratically, collectively, by the citizens, right, who are voting and almost managing the city in a collective manner, instead of a top-down corporation like Disney World, corporately owned city. Well, if Disney World can do it, then Boca can do it. And if Boca can do it, then maybe any city can charge taxes. Maybe any state can charge taxes. And maybe a federation of states, like the United States, can actually have an exclusive right to print legal tender. Having said that, I would like to see every city issue its own currency. I'd like to see cities have non-legal tender, but supplementary currencies like Ithaca hours or Vermont mountain dollars or Toronto dollars or whatever. I'd love to see that. That's happening in England. That's happening all over the place. It leads to stronger cities who can invest in themselves and their citizens. They don't have to go bankrupt like Detroit did because it cannot print its own currency because nobody knows what Detroit bucks are. So, bottom line, whose money is it is a complicated question. It's not something that can be left to philosophy that fits in a piece of paper.
Try to mislabel what you're saying, but just because someone got rich does not mean anyone got poor. In order to get rich in a market society, it means you have to employ.
Oh, come on. There's so many people here who are on the left. Come on, over here with the camera. Yeah, that's true. Just because someone got rich doesn't mean someone else got poor. Come on. I think Kyle will actually agree with that.
People, you have to have a good idea. You have to voluntarily sell it over a long period of time. People have to purchase that product. You have to continue to prove yourself. You have to run drive property.
See, most people are clapping, and he's going on and on. He's making sense.
You rent property. You have to get money flowing through the economy. Just because.
But here's the thing. Just because two people agree to make a deal, and it's win-win for both of them because they're smart enough and they read the contract and whatever, the rugged individualists, they have their own lawyers and they all, looked at dotted every I and crossed every T and they came to an agreement. Doesn't mean there aren't third parties that weren't party to the agreement that were harmed, right? So when I hire someone outside the United States to build my software, they don't pay taxes to the United States. They don't subsidize our standard of living. So guess who the third party is? It's every potential American employee who I didn't hire, right? So if those third parties add up, that could be a lot of negative externalities. I'll give you an example. The American family disintegrating because both people have to work. Women entered the workplace and want to make as much as men. Well, look, if there's X amount of jobs and now you have men and women both competing for those jobs, the wages, that puts downward pressure on the wages, right? Supply and demand. Too much supply of labor and not enough. So you saw like in the last 50 years, that's one factor of like, okay, women entering the workplace, look at the wages. That's one factor, right? So then what happens is you're now in this Red Queen race of like, we got to make more money. We got to make more money. Now both people have to work 10 hours a day to like pay the rent. Meanwhile, in the 50s, one guy could like support the entire household. Didn't have to be the guy. I'm just saying like usually it was the guy, right? Because of like cultural realities and other things. And because women physically, biologically like have to, raise a child, with breast milk, for example. Not every woman, okay, but women have the breast milk. I think that's inarguable. So if society expects women to raise the children, it expects men to make the money while that is happening. So again, the reality of it is that when people go to work, they start choosing to spend more, time at the job and lean in and become the make partner or whatever, so they can fuel the quote unquote the American dream, which in this case is fueling a lifestyle that their grandparents wish they had at all, like driving the giant gas guzzler cars and making sure that back then the cars were also pretty gas guzzling, to be honest, but like having the giant apartments with the air conditioning and everyone living in their own apartment. Can you believe that? Everyone living in their and there's now more people than ever and eating like. With the factory farms, we have to feed billions of people now. It's not your grandpa's farms. It's not your grandpa's anything. And so this lifestyle costs a lot of money. And for most people, this is what now you need clean running water. You need basics, but like people today are choosing to spend more time at work so they can have this stuff. And in the meantime, they miss their child's first words. They miss their child's first, steps because their child is in daycare. Their parents, they're getting old. Let's get professionals to look after them. So that is a third party externality. Husband says, I want to buy my wife something nice. I better spend more time at work. Wife says, I better, help my husband out, or I better actually, have a great lifestyle as well. Let me also spend 10 hours at work. So that's what a good economy looks like. And then they hire a professional to take care of their kids. And that's if they're making a lot of money, right? So that's a third party externality, which is the time and the attention that you give to your family. So paleoconservatives will see this and say, yeah, the family is actually an example of a third party negative externality of capitalism. I'll give you one more example. This would be a controversial example. Let's say, gangster rap. Okay. It is practically the only genre of music, although you could also say punk rock, maybe, that has lyrics, that basically are about violence, misogyny, drug use, shooting at police and all that stuff. So which demographic of people would you most be afraid to show this to? Young, impressionable children, right? And yet, of course, an entire industry, capitalistic industry is, propped up to sell that music to specifically black children, right? Because they have black rappers. They don't have so many Asian rappers, right? They don't have so many, whatever, like any nationality that's going to say, fuck the police, and call women B's and H's, right? So they're going to have, why? Are all black people in the 80s and 90s, were they all calling women B's and H's? No. So why specifically black rappers from the, from the ghetto? It's because there's a music industry. And if you look at, things like, The Merchants of Cool, for example, it's PBS documentary about this kind of stuff. They literally go out and they see how they can influence kids. Literally, Cool. This is like back 18 years ago. And I wouldn't be surprised if it had a big effect on kids, especially if they don't have a father at home, especially if their parents are not around and they have to be raised by the street or they have to be raised by professionals at school. What do you think they're going to listen to and they identify with? People who look like them. So I would say almost that in this country, capitalism has had a big effect on a group of people. It happens to be, in this case, controversial. It's, a generation of black, youth. Now the music's changed, but that group that grew up in the 90s when I was growing up is definitely affected by it. And their parents weren't and their grandparents weren't. So you can't chalk it up to slavery, and everything. If people are talking like that after high school, let's say coming out of school and they're like, fuck this, fuck that, what I'm basically saying is, that is a cultural thing. But again, capitalism does not almost care about it. If you could sell, you can make this whole industry, like the pornography industry. I'm not saying that necessarily there shouldn't be free speech. Dolores Tucker, nobody almost knows who this is. See Dolores Tucker talking about gangster rap back in the 90s. I remember she was talking about what's it? I mean, I didn't see it back then, but I saw it later. Talking about Snoop Dogg, talking about can you believe his album is just...
Now we want to hear from
his album is just
president of the National Congress of Black Political Women.
His album is all smut, and it's all about, you look at the thing, and I was like, nobody cares. And then she's like, when did self-blaxploitation become something you can't criticize anymore?
Media that distorts their images of male-female relationships, that undermines the stability of our families, communities, and nation by encouraging violence.
So, if you look at someone like this, is she a conservative? Is she a liberal? Well, I think she's more conservative, right? In this instance, the liberal position would be live and let live. Let Snoop Dogg and let, Biggie, whatever, say whatever they're gonna, let Biggie be Biggie, and bust them up. But the thing is, sure, Ice Cube can say F the police, but people, there is a negative externality to all this. So it's actually a conservative position and not a liberal position to be against, capitalism to some extent. But that's the paleo conservatives.
Violence, abuse, and sexism as acceptable behaviors and perpetuates a cycle of low self-esteem of African American youth. Thus, images that degrade our dignity and are an insult to our children, our families, and communities concern us too. And that includes all this gangster rap and misogynist lyrics.
It sounds so funny today, but really think about it. Really think about it. This is for kids. Anyways, so yeah, Charlie, but hey, just as long as there's two people, right? The consumer and the producer, they agree. Who are we to say that anyone's worse off?
Someone got rich does not mean they went around and stole the money away from people. Wealth creation in a market society requires innovation, entrepreneurship, something that makes every single person in this room richer. So when someone gets...
So if someone like 50 Cent gets rich, and he gets more than 50 cents, no one suffers from the kind of stuff that went on. By the way, 50 Cent, he actually lied about his wealth, but whatever.
Rich in a market society, they did not pillage and plunder and get that money with putting guns to people's heads. Instead, they were creative, they were entrepreneurs, and they were innovative, something that should be rewarded. And so that's where the philosophical difference is. You look at wealth creation as something that might be bad. I don't want to mislead.
I just want to say, by the way, today's conservatives, so-called, are much different. They're really the liberals of if you look at real conservatives in the 50s, these guys would be extreme liberals, right? Socially. So they would not make the argument that C. Dolores Tucker made in the 90s, right? They're the ones that are saying, look, free speech, and he's saying free speech. I'm actually on the other side of both of these guys, maybe. Because I'm basically saying that things have consequences, and free speech is not an exception. Everything has consequences, right? And by the way, when I say to me, freedom of speech, freedom is about liberty. It's about individual, I can say anything I want, right? And I can put out, whatever video I'm putting out now. I can move my mouth. I can be in a room of 100 people and I can say whatever I want. But at some point it morphs from a freedom to, do whatever, to move around, to talk, right? That's freedom of speech. It moves from that to essentially a platform that no one owes you a platform. Okay. And that's not a freedom. That is essentially when what I say is then a group of people, a network, an organization decides to amplify what I say, whether it's Twitter with its subscriber base and gives me a lot of subscribers, followers, whether it's a TV station that puts me on, or whether it's a show or whatever, I think there's a certain responsibility that's no longer about freedom. Just like I can stockpile 1 gun, 2 guns, but like if I'm stockpiling like for an entire, paramilitary force and I have bombs and whatever, at some point there's got to be some flip side, right? There's got to be a limit where you're like, wait a second, Second Amendment applies, but like, this is way too much. Like, what do you, what is that? So that may be an unpopular position, but I think honestly, everything has limits. It's not, this is ideological. And this is where I disagree with Kyle. Like my, freedom of speech thing is a little bit, quaint because soon we're going to have end-to-end encryption. It won't matter. You can't stop it. Okay. So I'm not going to pretend that like that it's enforceable, but like in theory, I think freedom should be freedom, right? And, it should be talking about actual human freedom. And you shouldn't be putting everything under one word. And so reaching 5 million people on Twitter in an instant, unfiltered, you could say anything, then you can radicalize them over time. You could have Louis Farrakhan say the Jews are cockroaches or whatever. You could have ISIS videos. You could have videos of people just like playing the knockout game or whatever, or shooting up something and putting it on. It's like, I think what I like to see is more like Wikipedia, right? Or something where each person contributed, but then they all kind of fought it out. And they all come up with this result so that when I come there, when the average person comes there and they would like to see something like, okay, here's an article, there's quality. Everyone's fought it out. If there was something to say, they've said it. There was like a talk page. You could look, how they fought it out, etc. And they discuss this stuff. And that I think is much more valuable for society than like the ideological, like, yeah, freedom. Okay, say anything you want. As long as you're not like totally inciting to violence, you're fine. Like maybe. But I think, and again, I am more of a conservative on this side. Now, it's interesting that these guys are actually both liberals. So I'm not totally a liberal. I think I am a liberal for freedom up to like 100 people, like do whatever you want. 1,000 people, like, okay, maybe. But like at some point, you can't just like yell at your followers and have your voice amplified that much. I mean, sometimes it goes over okay, like with FDR's radio addresses. And sometimes you've got Trump's Twitter rants, which are kind of funny. And sometimes you've got Hitler with his rallies. I'm just trying to say, and by the way, people don't realize this a lot of the time, but microphones and sound systems were really deployed right before Hitler. Like Mussolini would like yell from a balcony, right? Hitler was like a rock concert. So another reason why people had this fervor, I think, is because they were like coming to a rock concert almost. They had actual amplification of his voice for the first time. And so people weren't used to that yet. And even today with the rock concert, people are, but what if like during the rock concert, that person yells out something that incites everybody or whatever? I'm just saying, over time, they radicalize people. I don't know if necessarily that is an issue of freedom. Should you be free in an unlimited sense? I don't know. But I do see this as like my opportunity to express what I think.
But your preferred presidential candidate says billionaires should not exist. I believe that
Fair point. Ding.
every single person in this room that is using an iPhone, that goes to Amazon.com and uses Google and Facebook, your life has been made better thanks to the profit incentive that only someone that can become a billionaire is made possible. A market
Props to his rhetorical powers, yo.
economy is the greatest, most assured way to create wealth for all people. Socialism is much more about hating the rich than helping the poor. I yield my time to God.
I yield my time. Oh, how socialist of you. Look, one thing I'm just going to say, I disagree that socialism is about, is about the government controlling everything. This is the red herring. It's always that word, the government. Rand Paul has his book now, and he defines socialism as government owning the means of production. No, that's state capitalism, which is also pretty much the same as state socialism. Fine. But socialism can exist without government, just like capitalism can exist without government. Anarcho-capitalists know this. That's why they're talking all the time about their free market. But in fact, socialist organizations exist all the time. I grew up in one, a housing cooperative in New York City. Two senators, Mitchell Lama program. They created the Mitchell Lama program, which basically was, it's basically a tax incentive to build apartment buildings, which then would be socialist type co-ops. And in fact, they're nonprofits. Okay, they're corporations where each tenant gets one share, one vote, and then they have boards and they run themselves. And you look at these co-ops, and many of them today, especially in Manhattan, have the best landscaping. They have really nice parks. They even have a lot of space for the cars. to park. It's really nice amenities. And here's the interesting thing. They have lines around the block and almost no vacancies. As soon as a vacancy opens up, it's snapped up. There's lines around the block. Meanwhile, in the capitalist version, which is a landlord-owned apartment building, there are 11% of vacancies as an average in the United States. So in one, people are not eager to leave and voting with their feet to try to get in, and they're standing in line for years waiting. In the other, they're leaving all the time, and in fact, 11% is vacant. Now you may say that they've built more than they needed to, and that's capitalism. But then you shouldn't laugh at China that overbuilt the cities and then is moving people into them. China has been able to move 1 billion people out of poverty, and they have done this in a centrally planned way. I'm not saying that. So what China did is actually more of a state capitalism, or even maybe textbook fascism, because the government is working together with the corporations like WeChat, and it's exercising more and more control with the social life of the population. So in a way, it's almost like the textbook definition of fascism. So if you look at the actual definitions, the definition of socialism is collective ownership of the means of production. The means of production can include anything from buildings to computers that produce blogs or whatever. So if you look at a credit union is a socialist organization because it's owned by its own members versus a bank. And credit unions typically give you better rates than banks when you borrow. In fact, Donald Trump's dad built a bunch of buildings that were Mitchell-Lama buildings that were socialist organizations, and only recently, maybe 10 years ago, were privatized finally into condos. So, and apartment buildings. Literally, Donald Trump's dad built socialist organizations. Now, there are other socialist organizations like I forgot what the outdoor, what is it? REI, Socialist Collective. REI Co-op is a very prolific maker of outdoorsy gear and all that kind of stuff, from tents to whatever. I've seen it. Recreation Equipment Incorporated. This is a socialist organization. It's a co-op. Okay. All these organizations are nonprofit. They don't have a profit motive. And guess what? The rents in these housing co-ops are almost twice less than the rents in the capitalistic ones. Even with the rent control that is in the city, guess what? Having a nonprofit organization seems to make the rents not go up very much. And then you have stability in the housing market. There's also food cooperatives. So there's open source projects. There's many different ways to skin a cat, so to speak. Not necessarily just having a guy like Jeff Bezos own the entire thing. Or Mark Zuckerberg literally owning it to the point where his own shareholders cannot remove him even if they wanted to. They knew that they're buying into a very capitalistic organization. One that was funded by people who said competition is for losers. Peter Thiel said that. And that he wrote a book called 0 to 1, How You Should Build a Monopoly. So that would make many capitalists blush. The point is that it's not all capitalist. Socialism doesn't always fail. In fact, there's lots of socialism. Families are socialist, right? So socialism you can think of as collective ownership. So what that means is democracy. And whether it's collectively owning a city and deciding that, hey, we want to keep rents from growing unlimited amounts per year, we're going to cap so people aren't kicked out by their landlord for, not being able to afford next year's rent. Those things are looking out for the people in the cooperative. Now, are there problems with socialism? Sure. Because it's only good for people who have been grandfathered in or are able to get into the organization. Maybe you need more of these organizations, frankly. But when you're a new person, some of these organizations are going to be hazing you. You're going to be the immigrant, the new guy who has to earn his way into getting what everybody else has. So these socialist organizations respond to automation not by hiring more people, but by getting shorter work hours. And that's great. But they're not solving the underlying problem that social democracy solves. And social democracy is very different than socialism. Social democracy isn't about collective ownership. Social democracy is about capitalism with high taxes and large safety nets. That solves the problem. You don't have to work in a socialist organization to have healthcare. You just have healthcare. And maybe you have a universal basic income. Today, it's tied to employment. So there are socialist insurance cooperatives, mutual insurance and stuff like that, mutual reinsurance. There's lots of these things. So to say that socialism is always worse than capitalism, you would have to then explain why these housing cooperatives have lower rents for the same or bigger apartment, and people are able to live there for years and don't want to leave. Clearly something's going right over there. What you really should be asking is, do we want social democracy? And social democracy is, in fact, something that most countries have already. This country, the United States, has tons of social democracy. If you can have police, why can't you have doctors being paid for by public funds? What is really the difference? If you have courts, public courts that are available to anyone to sue or to find justice, why can't you have physicians that are available? Isn't that something we all need just as much as we need police? So there's an argument to be made for social democracy, but that's not the same thing as socialism, because socialism can exist without even... Socialism is about collective ownership of an organization. It's about how many votes does each person have. In capitalism, it's one share, one vote. If you have 1 million shares, you've got 1 million votes. And then you've also got common shares and preferred shares and all that stuff. In socialism, it's essentially the degree to which something is democratic. That's what socialism is. It doesn't solve the problem, however, of the unemployed. It doesn't solve the problem of the new guy or the guy that doesn't belong to any organization. So that needs to be solved by a universal safety net. And that's what Bernie and others are talking about. Unfortunately, the whole conversation has been so muddled that we don't even distinguish anymore, because there's talking heads on the right that call everything socialism, from Venezuela to Denmark, you know. And was it Trish? I forgot her last name, on Fox. She tried to call Denmark socialist and tried to say it's going to turn into Venezuela. And then you've got these commercials. Like, I love this commercial by Mercedes, where we went to the moon. And is it Mercedes? No, it's Cadillac. I'm sorry. It's a Cadillac commercial. And the commercial is basically about, look at us Americans. We don't take August off. We don't do anything. I hope I'm not busted for promoting their commercial.
Why do we work so hard? For what? For this? For stuff? Other countries, they work, they stroll home, they stop by the cafe, they take August off. Off. Why aren't you like that? Why aren't we like that? Because we're crazy, driven, hard-working believers, that's why. Those other countries think we're nuts. Whatever. Were the Wright brothers insane? Bill Gates, Les Paul, Ali. Were we nuts when we pointed to the moon? That's right.
I'm pretty sure that the Wright brothers did take August off.
Went up there, you know what we got? Bored. So we left. Got a car up there, left the keys in it. Do you know why? Because we're the only ones going back up there, that's why.
Turns out China went back there.
But I digress. It's pretty simple. You work hard, you create your own luck, and you gotta believe anything is possible.
Wait a second. Is that an electric car?
As for all the stuff, that's the upside of only taking 2 weeks off in August. Vespa?
Did he say Vespa? I don't know. But that's the attitude. That's the attitude. Is like, oh, those Europeans, what do they know about life? You gotta work hard. You gotta work hard because you get the car. Well, at least it's an electric car.
Well, allow me to steal from your favorite, well, he's president now, but wrong. So, look, I just want to test your theory real quick on wealth creation here. So, I'm going to give you 2 facts. I just want a yes or no answer. Jeff Bezos has over $150 billion. There are 50,000 homeless veterans in this country. If you could take 1% of his money to end homelessness for veterans, would you do it?
I hope he gets it voluntarily. I'll not put a gun to his head.
That's a no.
I'll tell you why. First of all, that's a false choice. That's a false choice. Let me tell you why.
It's a thought experiment.
Okay, now we're getting into ideology. Let's see what's happening. Why is this a false choice? Okay, fine. Let's see.
So we have spent hundreds of billions of
Because even Donald Trump is like, let's increase stuff for veterans, because everybody likes veterans. Well, listen, it is. They basically, look, they fought for our country. Even though, you know, we just spoke about how these wars may have caused a lot more harm than good. Obviously, the veterans who signed up, the idea is that they're going to defend America, which is an awesome idea. But let me be honest also and say that a lot of these veterans were sent to do these operations sometimes without congressional approval. These are not necessarily things that are defending America. These may be things defending other countries. And we're paying to defend those other countries. So it's an interesting question. I would argue that that is a huge, giant government socialist program as it is. Those 800 bases with the McDonald's and everything. Every year, we're being told that the soldiers don't have enough, that they're not getting enough clothing. I'm talking about the current soldiers. And of course, we're not taking look how many veterans we have. Look how big the army is. Look how much stuff we're equipping the soldiers with, but they never have enough. And last year we raised it by $100 billion for the army per year. $100 billion per year we could be using on something else. But here, the conservatives are like, yes, we need the biggest, baddest army. And if we need to defend everyone in the world to do it, that's what we're going to do it. America first, baby. And it's like, well, first of all, we have 800 bases around the world. This is a top-down organization. It's a federally funded organization that is arguably not even necessarily always the best thing that could be there. Like, for example, with Cuba and Guantanamo, right? We have Guantanamo Bay. We just simply took it from Cuba. Like, those guys didn't just want us there. We just kind of took it because Teddy Roosevelt during the Spanish-American War was like, well, we're taking it. If we're going to leave Cuba, like, we're taking it. In general, I may have some of those facts messed up. It may have not been Teddy Roosevelt. But my main point is that I have a lot of respect for the veterans, right? Some people may have signed up because they like violence, but a lot of people signed up to serve our country, okay? And so we should be serving them afterwards, right? Having said that, I would like to see a world in which that is not necessarily the thing that you should do. Like, you can join the Peace Corps, you can join Doctors Without Borders, you can have America lead in the world by helping its neighbors, Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico, how, Biden is paying lip service to now. People are getting a drought. Why don't we help them? Why don't we help end the drug wars in our own backyard, Mexico? No, we got to go halfway around the world with ISIS. So the thing is, like, even with the thing with the veterans, it's like, we have to say, of course, that, I support our troops, which is true. But at the same time, I don't support the missions that the troops are being sent to. You understand? I don't think we should have so many troops. I don't think there should be this top-down, organization that's so large, that's larger than the next 19 countries combined. So I should be able to say some of that at the same time, while saying I respect anyone who wants to stand up and defend my country, right? Freedom, liberty. But then we need to actually be facing a threat that is like from an army. I don't know, something that is more credible than like Assad is going to send planes and attack us. If you're over there and you're helping the anti-Assad, the Al-Nusra Front eventually gets the weapons, or if you're the Pentagon and you can't account for freaking $7 trillion, and you just you can't pass an audit, why are we giving you $100 billion a year more? Why are you always running out of money? Why are your Humvees being taken over by ISIS? Are you that stupid that you can't put locks or biometric locks or some kind of normal thing on a tank or on a Humvee? I mean, for crying out loud, we have that in civilian cars. So to me, it's almost like willful negligence at best. And I don't support that. So I support the veterans. I don't support the organization. A lot of the stuff that organization does, which is the U.S. Army around the world. So it's a conflicted thing. But here's what's not conflicted. Should we help the veterans? Why not? We should be helping everybody, though. Why not? Why just the veterans? But sure, if you're going to say that veterans are in greater need of help and Trump is helping them, do you applaud that Trump is doing this? Because he's effectively taking money from the rich and giving them to the veterans, right? And I guess put that way, Charlie would say yes. But here he's saying no.
Dollars to try to solve homelessness by taking money from the rich over the last 40 years. You want to solve homelessness? Stop electing Democrats. The city likes Los Angeles. Donald Trump is president. He's got 500,000 homeless people.
Oh my goodness. Okay, stop electing Democrats. Homelessness. Okay, let's take this one and really look into it, because I don't like this meme of like, look at California. It is so run by Democrats since 1988. Look how terrible. Look how many homeless. Here's the thing. California, for example, let's just take California. California attracts so many people. It has become, its GDP has risen so much, it is now the 5th largest economy in the world. Just the state of California is the 5th largest economy in the world. Now, here's the thing. California was growing before 1988. Okay, that whole thing with Hollywood. And then it was growing after 1988. That whole thing with Hollywood and Silicon Valley and everything else. So Democrats and Republicans did a pretty good job. So what happens is a lot of people who live in California then get pushed out by the capital that is being attracted into there. Whether it's human capital of people coming and trying to make it in LA, trying to make it in San Francisco, you know this, trying to make it in Palo Alto and Silicon Valley. These become very, very expensive places. But then the people working for the hotels, the restaurants, etc., need a place to live. And that's why these cities try to keep the housing prices down. But the influx of capital, including from Chinese billionaires and so on, raises the price of new construction. So look at the population of California. People say people are leaving California. But California is the most populous state in the union. Its population has grown under the Democrats and before 1988. People are pouring in. Capital is pouring in. So all these anecdotal stories about how California is so terribly managed, people are leaving, these are anecdotal stories. On the whole, California's GDP is the 5th in the world, and it used to be the 6th or 7th. Now it's the 5th. The number of people coming in has increased a lot. Sure, there is homelessness, but that is more than simply a factor of, the management of the state. It's just like the Hispanic poverty, okay? The war on poverty has decreased poverty in most demographics. One demographic where poverty has increased since the war on poverty began is Hispanics. But that's because many Hispanics entered the country. So what you do is you have induced demand. It's like when you make a highway and you add more lanes to the highway, you think that's going to get rid of traffic. But then you get even more traffic because more people are attracted to that highway. So it's not so simple. It's not simple to say that just because a city is run by Democrats, or California is run by Democrats, there's more homelessness. You look at any large city and there's people that have been pushed out. There's also people that have been doing drugs. And if there are clinics in the city that attract, that essentially treat people free of charge, they're going to go to that clinic in the city, and then they're going to stick around, and maybe they're going to, because they have nowhere to go, man. They're just going to stick around in that city and try to get food to eat and so on. Do I agree there should be better ways to treat homelessness? Of course. Utah has an incredible program in some of its cities. They give the homeless people, wait for it, homes. And it turns out it actually costs the city less to give people homes, even small apartments, than trying to take care of the issues that come up when they're on the street, including the health issues or incarcerating them and so on. Unless you have a policy of killing people if they're homeless, you're going to have to deal with them somehow. And even in these cities with homeless populations, there are neighborhoods that are devoid completely of homeless people. Those are typically the wealthy neighborhoods who pay, especially the police force of the city, extra to make sure that their neighborhood is clean and the house prices are, the real estate values are solid. They don't want to have homeless trailers in their neighborhood. It's not that simple. But yes, you could argue that, in other cities, they're not as welcoming to homeless people. And the homeless people are not seen. So I don't know. I just think it's a point that needs to be addressed. Same way that people say Canadians come over to the US in order to get healthcare because it's so bad in Canada. It's very simplistic. You have to look at the actual reality. And the actual reality is California is not a loser. California is a huge winner in the United States. And it might even have to be broken up into multiple states. And if that ever happens, the Democrats are surely going to do much, much better on the federal level. And perhaps this whole thing about the Senate and states being more important than people, and states' rights is going to have to be rethought by the Republican Party if that ever happens. But anyway, I digress. Let's continue.
I don't actually love Amazon or Jeff Bezos, but you're starting to make me like him even more throughout the course of the debate. Jeff Bezos did not make his money going around city to city with automatic machine guns stealing people's money away. Half this group probably uses Amazon on a weekly basis. You have to be innovative. You have to be an entrepreneur. He employs hundreds of thousands of people in an extraordinarily competitive market. He did not get it by being a robber baron. That's how you get rich in countries that are socialist countries. You get rich in a capitalist...
No, actually not wrong. There's a couple things here. If you look at Russia, after the whole thing where the Soviet Union collapsed, who got to run all of these TV stations? Who got to get all that fuel and the gas, and distribute all that? A bunch of people, essentially the oligarchs, as they later came to be called. They became billionaires. And until Putin came to power by being appointed almost by Yeltsin, well, actually, literally being appointed by Yeltsin, the Russian economy was being drained. A lot of capital was leaving the country. Because a lot of the people who suddenly found themselves in possession of a lot of wealth realized, hey, I could have a lot of things abroad. And of course, there was a lot of corruption. After socialism falls, there's always a lot of corruption. Because during socialism, there has to be some sort of capitalist bribe-based economy. And I'm using socialism in the sense of the USSR being called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Don't have this illusion that just because socialism is in the name, that means that it's, run in a socialistic manner completely. Just like, most of the countries that have the word democracy or democratic in the name are not democratic very much. Like the East Timor or Congo or, North Korea. So that doesn't mean democracy is bad, right? Similarly, if you're saying that the National Socialists, the Nazis were socialist, you would be right up until the Night of the Long Knives when they pretty much decimated that wing of their party. They continued to be called socialists in name only, but they weren't really that much socialist. They didn't, for example, look to redistribute a lot of the wealth from the rich to the poor. But then again, that's the kind of socialism on a state level. You don't have to redistribute. That would be social democracy. So let's just put it this way. The Nazis weren't evil because they had universal health insurance for everybody. Okay? Or they weren't evil because they had police that was available and courts available for everybody. Okay? It was more their right-wing ideas about racial purity and, well, so many ideas, or about the Untermenschen, and then how Deutschland is supposed to go beyond its borders and take over, the Anschluss. You got the Austrian annexation, and then you get the Germanic peoples, and then you get the Aryan race, and you're going to have Germany über alles, over everybody. It's a very nationalistic, right-wing, xenophobic thing. I think that is closer to why the Nazis were considered evil than because they had universal health insurance. Denmark has that today. When is the next time Denmark is going to? Let me ask you this. When are the first gulags going to open in Denmark or Sweden? Okay. When are the bread lines going to start? Okay. Level with me. What's the TTV of France? The time to Venezuela. See, the thing is, social democracy and universal safety nets are not the same thing as nationalistic, xenophobic, movements that create concentration camps for certain people. Look, FDR in this country was very suspicious of the Japanese, and he created internment camps, and he forcibly put together a program to put them in those camps, for which the United States later apologized. FDR turned away ships full of Jewish refugees fleeing the Holocaust because there were rumors, according to the Smithsonian's history, that Jews were suspected of being Nazi spies among them. Can you believe that? Nazi spies among Jews fleeing the Holocaust. These kinds of things are all over the world. They're more right-wing mentalities, like when we turn away people from Syrian refugees because we think that among them might be hiding some terrorists. Or when we put kids into very unsanitary conditions and we don't want to increase staff or facilities because, hey, they're just migrants and we want to make it so that to send them a message that they shouldn't be coming here. I would say Trump and FDR share things in common, even though FDR was a populist Democrat, and in this case, Trump is a populist Republican. And those kinds of things that they share are not necessarily great things that I would say are good for the people.
For society, you must have a good idea. People must believe in that idea and continue to purchase that idea over a
But
long
Charlie,
period of time.
there's this thing called a social contract.
Oh, this is a very simple thing. When did I sign that, Kyle? I must have missed it.
Okay, well, you can go live in Somalia where they have none. Good
All
luck.
right, so you believe the Soviet theory that all of us are nothing more than a collective. I disagree.
I didn't say that. I said there's a social.
Collectivism versus individualism. But here's the thing. This is not mutually exclusive. This is like a false equivalence, false dichotomy, right? I'd rather let these guys debate. I don't want to inject my thoughts into everything, but I will say one thing afterwards.
Social contract.
Who do you think wrote the social contract theory?
Well, I thought you liked the Constitution. I thought you liked our
Like
founding
the
fathers.
Constitution that talks about this is so important. The Constitution actually rejected social contract theory. It said our rights come from what? From God, not from government. That government should not infringe upon your rights.
I just want to say one thing. The Declaration of Independence said that. The Constitution, I don't think, makes reference to that. In fact, the Constitution was a product of the Federalist movement to give a lot of power to the federal government, something the states were distrustful of. And before the Constitution, we had the Articles of Confederation. And we had other presidents that people don't really remember or know their names of. So, George Washington was the first president of the United States of America under a strong federal government. So in fact, but Charlie's wrong here because the states were actually ceding a lot of power to the federal government, which has grown even stronger. And the Constitution that he speaks about was actually a result of the Federalists winning and saying that we do need a stronger federal government than just having 13 colonies in a confederation.
The Constitution rejected coercive government action. The United States Constitution rejected the idea that actually the entire United States Constitution was a warning sign against having government come too much infringing of our rights. This is the actual philosophical.
While that is true, if you put it in context, the Constitution did that, a lot of it, as a concession in a lot of arguing. And the Bill of Rights was, the states accepted it, the Constitution, provided that the Bill of Rights would be provided, afterwards. And those rights were, in fact, put in place. The Constitution is simply the Constitution of a federation that was inaugurated, and ratified by most of the states. And that's how we got it, essentially. But the states themselves were formerly commonwealths that were composed of cities, and so on down. So I don't think Charlie's arguing against people forming cities or neighborhoods or commonwealths. So this whole thing with the Constitution, he's already lost, because unless he wants to go all the way down to the individual and say that cities don't have a right to exist or have a right to impose their specific laws like 25 miles per hour on a road or whatever, or driving licenses, unless he's willing to say that everything should be libertarian, he's a conservative. He's not an extreme anarcho-libertarian. And so in that case, what is he talking about?
The debate of our time, because Kyle, you look at the entire political kind of system, and you say, okay, there should be more government action because we must look ourselves first and foremost as a collective. Therefore, Jeff Bezos, the only way he was able to get that amount of money was eventually try to exploit people over a longer period of time. I look at
exploit is an interesting word. I mean, the people working in his warehouses literally have to pee into a cup or into a bottle because they don't have time for bathroom breaks. What do you think that is? If they're able to survive about 3 months before burning out and being replaced by someone else, their situation must be really bad to take the job. Or they might be a masochist or an undercover reporter. Honestly, a situation where people are forced to take jobs like this shouldn't be the greatest country in the world. The richest country in the world. So if Jeff Bezos, or put it another way, and Bernie says this a lot, if you fire and lay off a lot of people because you can't afford to pay them, but then you can afford to give your CEO a $50 million bonus, or when banks that were losing money were giving their top executives huge bonuses, that's not even good capitalism. That is essentially people helping their buddies or people who are well connected. Now, in another sense, if you need to be bailed out, like Donald Trump needed to be bailed out after his numerous bankruptcies, he has friends that can send him a lot of money, and banks and individuals at banks who could have simply foreclosed on his properties, but instead chose to give him more money. And there's an entire movie about this. Back in the day, he's been very lucky to be bailed out. He could be a pauper right now after his dad's empire. His dad really built a lot of stuff, but living in that world, you have welfare. You have a safety net. There's always safety nets for the rich. Every bank, every other sort of rich, individual, not every, but many of them are willing to give you a chance because, hey, you've got a lot of money already. So the chances of you being bailed out are really high. Everybody else does not get that kind of safety net. Now, if everyone had that and they had a UBI, chances are Jeff Bezos wouldn't be able to keep them in such shitty conditions. I would argue for a UBI and a 20-hour work week. So eventually we'll get there. I'd like to scale up the UBI from $100 eventually to $1,000 or $2,000 a month. And I'd like to scale back the work week from 40 to 20 hours over 10 or 20 years. But I think that's where we have to be, considering that automation will replace the Uber drivers and the people working at Amazon and McDonald's and so on. And the kiosks will replace the cashiers. So this thing where the capitalists assume that the employees will always be valued by the employer, that is a 20th century outdated notion. And when the socialists think that the union can collectively bargain for better rates, that is coming from the same idea that the employees will be valued. But in fact, if McDonald's workers unionized and tried to say we want $15 an hour, that will just make sure that McDonald's will come out with kiosks and robots that much sooner. They'll rather invest into R&D and take on debt in order to stop paying the larger minimum wages. So I agree with Charlie that minimum wage should be abolished, but only after safety nets are put in place. Then people can actually take unpaid internships and work on things that they can learn on the job and become better at. Then they can go to school and they can learn things in massive online courses and other things like that. But in the meantime, there's exploitation. And between countries, there's tons of exploitation. In fact, it's the people on the left who make the argument that who's going to pick the crops, right? Stephen Colbert is like, I don't want to pick those crops anymore in his testimony to Congress. That's a funny testimony, but these are actually the industrialists in that case. Why should the migrants be exploited? That's the same dynamic, right? They come and they're given lower wages and longer hours, and they're just happy to make enough money to send back home to their families. So the thing is, we've got to improve living conditions for everybody, not just in the United States. But again, that kind of global awareness of humanity is still something that we're far away from, unfortunately.
Look at that and I say, wow, that is a beautiful thing that someone is able to create that much wealth for that many people. And guess what?
And not pay his people a living wage until we forced him to.
Hold on a second. We'll let Charlie finish and you'll have a response. I believe in private collective bargaining.
Which is true. Bernie forced him to pay minimum wage, and he's not even president, and he's able to do a lot more. So that's, Trump talks about bringing back carrier jobs. He's a president, and he wasn't able to finally do that, make a lasting change. Bernie did. He did that with Disney World as well, I believe. And he did that while doing a lot of other things as well. So would Bernie make a good president? Yeah. But I think with the whole idea of minimum wage and that other stuff is temporary. It's something that it needs to be replaced with a more permanent solution, something that can scale with automation, something that can address the growing threat from automation, reducing demand for human jobs.
I also believe in a booming economy. We have more job openings than people to fill it. If people at Amazon are quite happy, when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said that Amazon's the worst thing in the world, she was responded to by Amazon worker after Amazon worker and said our wages are going up. We have wonderful living with Jeff Bezos.
Well, let's be real here. Amazon wasn't going to create a wage slave factory here in New York City. It was mostly white collar jobs that they were going to create. So when he says Amazon worker after Amazon worker, he needs to specify that he's talking about wage slaves who love to be wage slaves and essentially have no bathroom breaks. I really doubt that. So let's just be clear. White collar jobs at Amazon versus the warehouse slaves.
Right behind them.
But again, I want to make myself perfectly clear. I'm actually highly critical of Amazon. I'm really glad they didn't get the $10 billion taxpayer-funded contract for their company. However,
I am glad as well, but for a different reason. First of all, yeah, why should the taxpayers fund, give that giveaway to Amazon? Okay, that happens. I mean, that is something that we want to attract companies. But New York City is very wealthy, and we have a lot of people here. We don't need a corporation to organize our labor for us. We don't need these Ubermenches to come on down and help us organize ourselves. We could use that money here at home to employ one another. So again, this whole thing about corporatism in America, it's sad, but it's hijacked so many of our other things, like the family debate. It's become women earn 70 cents on the dollar, which first of all is outdated. And secondly, it has this unspoken assumption that we should all be cogs in corporate machines in order to finally fulfill some sort of new plan, new agenda that is now on the table for all of us. And if you're not part of it, then you're part of the problem. But I think that is the problem. And if you're part of saying that we need corporate overlords to organize our economy for us, and otherwise, our own money over here is going to be exported to somewhere else. Our labor is going to be, the fruits of our labor are going to be useful around the world. Fine. But they're not the only ones out there. We don't have to woo them with tax breaks. The tax breaks are small compared to essentially what's happening overall. But just that general idea that a corporation is the only way that we can organize ourselves and have a thriving economy, I think needs to be strongly questioned. Not just for economic reasons, but for socio-political and family reasons. Because our society really needs to get off the antidepressants. And it really needs to scale back the 40-hour work week, which is these days far longer. And the government is the only vehicle by which we can put in place safety nets and mandate that overtime is paid after 30 hours, not 40.
We'll take a definitive stand against the demonization of wealth creation in our country. Because
But he's doing that. You're talking to yourself.
Well, your preferred candidate says billionaires should not exist.
That is true. He does say that. Unfortunately, Bernie also says that he is a socialist, a democratic socialist, when he's really a social democrat. Bernie creates a lot of problems for himself, despite being an excellent person of character who's consistent and right about so many things. He was even right about decriminalizing drugs, but he kind of backpedaled on that to be more acceptable. And now Andrew Yang has outflanked him on the left about that. But he used to be on the right side of almost every issue. However, he is very limited politically, and I'm surprised, like the time that he declined to attack Hillary Clinton on her emails. And later, he started attacking her on other things, but that was too late. He said, nobody gives a damn about your emails. That wasn't true. It's not just the emails, right? It's the warmongering. It's the whole thing with when George W. Bush did it with the 22 million emails, where they tried to hide the tail wagging the dog and trying to make a pretext for the war in Iraq with weapons of mass destruction. They didn't want people to know about that. So Bernie didn't vote for that stuff. Hillary did. So he didn't make a good case. But the thing that Bernie really needs to do is start attracting the 30 to 80 year olds. Okay. They're going to have the free time to go out and vote for him in the primary. But no, he's just doubling down on more giveaways for people who right now are going to college. Like, there's people that skipped college because they couldn't afford it. So paying down everyone's student loans. Now those guys are losers. What about people who paid off their student loans already? Are we going to give them that money still? No. So essentially it's a big giveaway to the college educated crowd, which is again, maybe he wants to get, Elizabeth Warren's, voters. No, what he has to do is, the reason Bernie isn't getting all this publicity is simple. He's consistent. He has nothing new to say except more giveaways for his demographic that's already voted for him, for his base. He needs to expand his base. Okay. Or he needs to do one thing. If Elizabeth Warren would agree, one of them needs to drop out of the race and become the VP. Okay. Then they win. Then the other one wins. I would rather Bernie win, not because he's a man and she's the woman, but because he built that coalition in 2016. Also because he is actually consistent for all these years. She's been a Republican, then she's become a Democrat, then she's close to Clinton, but she's not. And she has a public position, and then in private, she tells people that she'll be more fair to the billionaire class or whatever. Look, Bernie needs to stop saying things that shoot himself in the foot. Like, felons need to vote. Have the vote. Like, sure, he answered that on Fox. But then you shouldn't, like, double down and make it one of your, like, positions for a few weeks. Just let it go. Or like free college for all, like fine, public college for all, okay. But then forgiveness of all student debt is a massive giveaway. So again, he needs to look at which celebrities, for example, appeal to the Democratic voters between 30 and 80 years old. And then his campaign needs to literally just schedule each of those celebrities to pull an AOC or to pull a Killer Mike or a Cardi B. Literally just say, hey, you know, I'm this Hollywood actor and I'm for Bernie Sanders. Hey, I'm this, you know, I don't know, whatever, musician, anyone who's respected, a businessman. Okay. I'm for Bernie Sanders. Okay. I'm Warren Buffett. I'm for Bernie Sanders. There's got to be something. All these fresh faces are going to get on TV for sure. Warren Buffett being for Bernie Sanders gets coverage. Oh, every other week there's a new person out for Bernie Sanders. That's a movement. Instead, it's just Bernie Sanders and large crowds of young people. And look, Kyle is young. Most of the people, the Rational National, David Dole, all these guys, they're young. And look, I think of myself as pretty young, but honestly, young people aren't like even 51% of the vote. Like you have to literally look at Brexit. Okay. Look at what happened there. So if Bernie, it's sad to see, but if Bernie's campaign just doesn't expand his base, doesn't set up a bunch of variety that's going to be covered by the media, doesn't hijack the media's appetite for media crack, then they're just not getting the $2 billion of media coverage that Trump got. He didn't get it because he was an establishment guy. The media was against, Kyle would admit, that the media is against anti-establishment, right? But they can't help covering him because he says new things all the time, crazy things, right? It's like when Ben Carson said that pyramids were built by aliens and house grain, you know, well, those two separate statements. Or when he said that, you know, he stabbed his friend in the belt buckle. But luckily, you know, the belt buckle stopped him. Like, that's insane stuff, but he was overtaking Trump that week in the media. And the voters he was actually overtaking him in the polls in one state. That's what gets coverage, like it or not, in this country. You need to have variety and something for the media to report on. Trump gets it instinctively. Say what you want about him. At least he's a very smart, savvy brand marketer. He just does it on instinct. And Bernie is like the anti of that. I like that. Kyle likes that. But you need to work within the system. And the system is driven by the media and Facebook and this kind of stuff. So if Bernie can't have variety, which he can't, then bring variety. Have different people come out for him every week. Make it a thing. This week, so-and-so came out for Bernie. Let them get in line. Sometimes mix it up. Make it twice a week, whatever. The media will start to talk about Bernie all the freaking time because they wouldn't be able to help it. And then he would win. But my free advice is never going to reach his campaign, I'm pretty sure.
But you know what that means, Charlie? Somebody could have $999 million and they're still really rich and they're going to be okay. And we can give people health care and we can give people college.
So let's talk about it. The rule should not be how do we not have billionaires. The rule should be how did we create $22 trillion of wealth in this country? It's because we have the most people? No. Most natural resources? No. It's because of a market economy that embraces risk-taking, entrepreneurship, and the individual. Countries across the world have tried
Hold on a second. That's not the only reason why. Now, that is true, but at the very top, it's no longer embracing the risk-taking in the individual. Okay. At the very top, you essentially have, well, okay, let's start at the very bottom. Countries that have bankruptcy protection for entrepreneurs, limited liability, where you're actually able to start a business, and if that business goes under, you're not personally liable and you can walk away. That is a safety net, and that is a major safety net the U.S. has. Some states, like Delaware, attract the most startups, like my own, like Facebook, like pretty much any startup that was funded by Silicon Valley was reincorporated in Delaware as a C corporation. That's the structure that funds the great entrepreneurship that has led to essentially what we're looking at right now, Google, Facebook, the web. Now, a lot of other innovation comes from more socialist movements like open source and science, things where essentially the products are given away and you don't have to pay rent to anyone to you know, go ahead and look at the source of a website and host your own thing. Now, in the past, we had America Online, where you couldn't view the source and you couldn't host your own web server or anything like that. You had to pay rent to America Online. Now that does work, but I would even argue that the open source economy, the science economy, the Wikipedia economy is better for society. There's less biased news. There's less, lock-in with Facebook or Microsoft or whatever. And there's more freedom. Is that freedom? Yes. It's a left libertarian type of idea. And there's less ownership of ideas, of IP, of anything. So when it comes to billionaires, the reason Steve Jobs, and we go to the top, the reason Steve Jobs is waking up in the morning and he was trying to build Apple and then next computer. And then he spent most of his money. It wasn't to make a lot of money. He said in his address, he doesn't want to be the richest guy in the cemetery. It's to make a ding in the universe. He got up every morning because he wanted to be that guy presenting the next iPhone, the next iPod, the next Macintosh. He reinvented 3 times at least the computer industry, the music industry, the internet. We all walk around with his legacy in our pockets. I mean, it's incredible. Probably the person who is responsible for the most hours spent on a device is Steve Jobs, hands down. Now, he took credit for a lot of things. And before Donald Trump, I really thought he was the king of bullshitters like ever. I thought that nobody was a better bullshitter than he with his reality distortion field. But then I saw Donald Trump and, it's hard. Then I saw another level where you can literally say one thing on video and then the next day say that you've never said it and your base will believe you. Even though there's a video of you saying it, they'll say that the video of you is fake news. So that's a whole other level. But Steve Jobs needed his fan base and, they definitely love Apple. And Donald Trump needs his fan base. It's about branding. It's about communication to your base. And so Jeff Bezos isn't in it to be a billionaire, I think. I think he's in it because he enjoys changing the world and building stuff. Elon Musk is not in it to be a billionaire. So I'm not saying we should take away their wealth. I think a wealth tax won't be very effective, but who knows? What I do know is these guys will come to work the next day if they're taxed at 60% personally. Even if they have only 999 million, 900 whatever, million, they will come into work. So this is an academic discussion at the billionaire level, okay? Because there's people that need to eat. And if, the only way to feed them was to take money from billionaires, I'm pretty sure many people would be like, Charlie, I love you, but I'm not buying your ideology. Just like, free speech, unlimited free speech or unlimited economic freedom or whatever. I mean, at some point, you're doing so well, you're not going to drop below 999,000, whatever, 999 million. So, and if you do, then you're still better off than the guy that has 100 million. Anyway, the bottom line is, yeah, you could probably have a progressive tax at some point having 100% tax, but just politically, the optics of it, I guess Bernie has a point, but again, it's one of those points that we're not ready as a country to really embrace. We really idolize those billionaires, just like we used to idolize the army and other things, the American dream. And we used to do this, we used to do that with the dream that one day we'll be we'll have one of those things. But most people will never have one of those things. So, in this life, what kind of society do you want to live in? But I think it's a false choice. I don't think you have to take billionaires' money in order to fund the country. I think that corporations, should be paying more. I think that, I think we should have a universal basic income and a shorter work week, at least for starters, and eliminate the minimum wage.
Everything from exploitation and stealing money away. India has more people. China has more people. The only reason China is able to get any sort of form of economic growth, they tried state-run coercion, is they actually embraced more market principles over the last 15, 20 years, despite the evil communist Chinese party. Kyle, here's the question I have for you.
Yeah, but I must say that the project of lifting billions of people out of poverty and moving them from farms into cities, you had to build the cities. And, people were making fun of China of overbuilding and having the ghost cities. Not everyone's living there. Well, of course, it takes time to move people into the cities. And I am very wary of central planning because of the social implications of, social credit score and the power that people have. Under Putin, when things were good for 10 years, 15 years, people loved Putin. And, and now you could put things in place that, criminalize, scientists going abroad, without telling the government what they're doing. In China, there's a massive rise in living standards. So people love Xi Jinping and now he's president for life. But now they're arresting the Uyghurs. 1 million people who could be somewhere in a internment camp or re-education camp, which Chinese aren't even denying that they have re-education camps. The only question is how bad is it in there? We don't know necessarily. We've got Christians, we've got Falun Dafa, which is also a few millions of practitioners, a peaceful, wacky religion that has been persecuted by the Chinese government systematically. We've got the Tibet separatists. We've got now people protesting in well, pretty much everywhere. That is Hong Kong, for example. Basically, you have a lot of people who need to, who run afoul of the Chinese government. So I am not a fan of oppressive governments for that reason. But central planning certainly works. This site was centrally planned by Google. Facebook is centrally planned. LinkedIn is centrally planned. Economies of scale work. Okay. We're not on a small video site hosted by Politicon.com. We're on YouTube. We're buying from Apple. That's centrally planned. US is full of corporations that are quite centrally planned, and sometimes planned by one person like Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos to a large extent. So these things are centrally planned. And, it's just a question of, do we want to work for these corporations? Do we want our entire society to be run around those corporations? Or do we want a smaller, more libertarian, left libertarian, perhaps, society where everyone has their little small business and has a safety net, which they're getting free food, or they're getting, food stamps for food. They're getting universal health insurance for health concerns and all that kind of stuff. I'd rather live in that kind of society so people can write open source software and, pursue scientific discoveries and take care of their children, take care of their great grandparents. But right now, this is not how people look at the world. They still have this Puritan ethic that if you don't work, you don't eat. And so, unfortunately, the corporations have been able to hijack that ethic. And I think I could even convince Charlie that, even if you agree that capitalism is great, why have corporatism? Why have corporations run the show?
You believe when people
Isn't that centrally planned?
will create a certain amount of wealth from Facebook or Google or Apple or Home Depot or Amazon, the companies that everyone in this room use, Coca-Cola on down. Do you believe that's inherently exploitation, or do you believe that to get that through voluntary transaction and enriching people all the way along?
I don't believe it's inherently exploitation, but I also believe we need rules and we need referees. And I also think
I totally agree.
I see shades of gray where you see black and white, and your whole thing is like, oh, the free market is so great, it's so wonderful. No, hold on here, because I'm actually the real moderate on this, because I think sometimes the answer is the free market, and sometimes, yes, the answer is government. Government is not inherently evil either. Government has done a lot of good things.
Okay, great debate point. He's basically saying, look, do you see any role for government? Like, I like government sometimes, and sometimes, sure, you can have this, but is your hammer for every nail, or can you sometimes use government? Let's see what he says.
So look,
That shouldn't be controversial.
This guy's pretty tired, by the way.
You believe in having the military, you believe in the government. If you believe in you believe in the government.
but right now, as we stand, we have a fourth branch of government. You'll agree with this. We have a fourth branch of government. We are the most regulated economy in the Western Hemisphere outside of some of the Western European countries. Federal Trade Commission, the Employment Prevention Agency, which is also called the Environmental Protection Agency. We have agency after agency, hundreds of agencies with unelected, unknown, and unchecked bureaucrats. And guess what?
That's true. And by the way, a lot of those bureaucrats that were appointed by Trump had absolutely no relevant experience. Okay? Like the guy with the animal husbandry bachelor's who became, I think it was Rick Perry? I forgot. Who is essentially in charge of the Department of Energy, for example. Okay, that's in charge of our nukes. But he didn't even know that. He was like, what? I would just abolish the Department of Energy. What do they do? And then later Trump was like, you're the head of the agency. He's like, I read up on it and I'm humbled by how much, they do. Dude, that guy is in charge of it now. Or like he wasn't in charge of it. Or like the guy who was like against the EPA and like suing the EPA becomes the head of the EPA. Or like how a brilliant surgeon, becomes the housing director and he has no idea what an REO is, right? He thinks it's an Oreo, or Betsy DeVos, I guess. Well, that maybe she has some experience, at least. She seems to be an ultra, capitalist approach to everything. But it's kind of sad when the director of housing and urban development says we need like less support for the housing initiatives. Anyways. So that's Trump's appointees. So clearly we do have unelected bureaucrats. And Ajit Pai is actually someone that Obama had been grooming or putting, is going to put into place. So I can't really give that one to Trump. But the point is, again, that unelected bureaucrats are and could be a problem. Sure. Well, I mean, people fill positions, right?
They favor the power of the well-connected, the few, and the rich that are able to afford the lobbyists. And you look at this. So, Kyle, here's another question that I'm just always perplexed by.
He wants to ask us a question, so let's let him talk.
It's fine. Okay, but let me close the point. So you say, Charlie, I look at things as the way are. We right now spend over $1 trillion of our own money to regulate the economy. That's far too much money. The best regulation is competition. The best regulation is encouraging more entrepreneurs.
He says he's flipping things. How do we know that we spend $1 trillion of our money to regulate the economy? Where does he get that from? It would be nice to source his facts a little bit. Is that because all the taxes in the federal government are like, what, 3 trillion or 2 trillion? I don't know, per year. So not all of that goes to regulating the economy. I know for a fact that large expenditures are going to Social Security and Medicare, right? Those are not optional. Then you have the Army, the armed forces. So that's not regulating the economy. Regulation may cost, maybe he's talking about $1 trillion in compliance and auditing. Maybe that is what's going on. There are so many ways to cut waste and costs, though, using technology and automation. It's a good thing. Why don't we focus on that? Keep the regulation as it is, program those rules into computers, and have, kiosks and self-driving cars and robots at Amazon and so on. These are good things. Just give the people some of that wealth. Tax the robots, like Bill Gates says, and give people some income so they can eat, and then they can work on pursuing their own individual happiness, as it says in the Declaration of Independence.
Your worship, the best regulation is empowering individuals to be able to compete against the big power brokers that you think that need to be disrupted.
Okay, so let's move on to culture. One of the big parts of Trump's campaign was talking about political correctness. So, Kyle, I want to get your thoughts on this.
Oh, they might actually agree on this. Which, by the way, I wanted to see Bernie versus Trump because they would agree like 50% of the time. Bernie would be like, I don't think the government should be profiting off of student loans. And Trump would be like, I agree. I also don't think, because they don't care. They don't care what people think. And, well, in a way, they both care what people think in a different way. So Trump cares what his base thinks. And he was like for red flag laws, but then it turns out that his base is not. So he's like, oh, never mind. I never said that. It's fake news. And Bernie is kind of listening to farmers. And then he's like, we got to make sure there's like a right to farm law. So like they are listening to people, right? Don't get me wrong, but like they say what's on their mind in a different way also, right? Trump says what's on his mind right now, and Bernie says what's on his mind, like in terms of like integrity and principle, but they both say what's on their mind. And so, just like a broken clock is right 2 times a day, I think they would agree like 50% of the time, which would be a very nice debate. Unfortunately, the only debate that you'll ever see with Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, unless he wins this time, Bernie does, is at midnight, Bernie, Trump. If you look at that, Chris Hardwick, okay, the guy who used to do, this is I can't. You got to watch this. It's such a great debate. Okay.
For a few years, how are we doing on that issue? Where do you draw the line? And generally, how do you think our political climate has improved or gotten worse since that time?
I mean, honestly, this kind of bores me, this topic, because it's like, okay, whatever, political correctness. I think I'm relatively politically incorrect. I say things that piss people off all the time. I mean, it is what it is. But my problem with the right is that oftentimes they take this term of political correctness, and what they really want to do is use that as an excuse to say things that are factually incorrect. So when Donald Trump goes out there and he says, for example, like he did on the campaign trail, that we need a total and complete shutdown of Muslims coming into this country. That's not politically incorrect. That's just incorrect. You're just a dick. Because there's like a billion people.
I just don't know, but that was good.
And they're not all guilty for the sins of Al-Qaeda. So, yeah, that's my take on it. I think I'm politically incorrect myself, but I think that oftentimes people on the right use it to get away with saying things that are just factually incorrect.
Charlie, so I guess the question is, are we more or less politically? I mean, look, it depends on how you live in the country. I mean, California, it's perfectly fine to border jump or line cut to come into our country, but if you misgender someone, you could face prison time in California. So
that's totally not true.
Okay. See, that's what I mean about Charlie. Like, show me one person who actually went to prison for that. I think I saw this, and it was like, oof. Like, there was a very tenuous connection to maybe if you interpret the law theoretically in a certain way, then maybe somebody could go to prison if they willfully, repeatedly said something harassingly many times. Maybe. So like that, from this he gets you could go to prison if you misgender someone. I don't know. But maybe in Canada, I mean, you do have, that guy, Jordan Peterson, and that was his whole thing that propelled him to fame, is that he says, I refuse to be forced to do this. So maybe they were contemplating doing criminalization of misgendering in Canada. I don't know. But there's at least one guy that made a whole initial career move about that alone. So people didn't say, what are you talking about? There's not even a law like this. So maybe in some places like Canada, there are laws like that. Who knows?
On the books, there's a law on the books that if you're an employee of the state government of California,
there's like a law in the books that if you don't have bells on your bicycle, like you're going to get a ticket and you might get arrested. Bells on your bicycle. There were laws that, there were a lot of public indecency laws, like if you have your curtains open and you're taking a shower or whatever, then you get a summons. I don't know. Again, why even get into this? I don't know.
If you misgender someone as an employee of the state of California, intentionally, you could potentially go to prison for workplace harassment.
This is hyperbolic nonsense. We have the First Amendment and that's the Supreme Court of land.
Opinion, you're not entitled to your own facts.
That's what I mean. Fact. No one's ever gone to prison over this. Where's this law? Look it up yourself. I'm not going to do it in this video. Yes, the First Amendment. Look, he's ideological. Like there could be obviously caveats to the First Amendment, right? We've seen it before. But for the most part, I told you in this kind of debate, I would give him the benefit of the doubt. I remember seeing this and researching it and being like, okay, dude, come on. But I did say for the purposes of this debate, I'm going to take everyone seriously. So yeah, sure, there's a law and probably we should take away that law. And so maybe point to Charlie. Okay, political correctness has gone too far. You should not be jailing people, even though no one is.
I visit college campuses all the time. A lot of what you say is...
We're so impressed, bro. Go wear a diaper again.
I visit college campuses all the time, and I'll tell you, Kyle, if you saw... I think if you're intellectually honest, you'll agree with this.
He does actually go on campuses and he tries to like, get people into arguments. And he stays fairly respectful, at least in the videos that he shows. Who knows what happens the rest of the time. And Steven Crowder does something like that too. I give them props for putting themselves out there, although I've critiqued the Steven Crowder video in the past and I didn't find it very impressive.
That the speech police that happens all across the country, where it's telling people that they can't say certain things, where they're cracking down on saying America's the greatest country in the history of the world. I have to say that these are the types of things that should be really concerned.
They're cracking down on saying America's... So there's a thing, actually, there's a very nice article about not political correctness, but patriotic correctness, which somebody coined this term. And I thought that was really cool because like the Dixie Chicks, when they were against George W. Bush's WMD Iraq War, people boycotted the Dixie Chicks. So isn't that similar? Where the right is like, oh, you're not saying the flag is like the best thing ever, and you're not saying like America's the best country. Get out of here. Go back to whatever country you're from. If you don't like it here, we are the land of like XYZ. And if you don't like it, like the nationalist thing. So I thought this was a good article. American nationalism, history, and cherry-picked ideals. Cherry-picked because a lot of American ideals include religious tolerance, for example, right? Include things like a free press, right? Which are liberal ideas, by the way. So in this case, as a liberal, right, I would say that freedom of speech is under attack in the sense of a free press being put down by Mr. Donald Trump as the enemies of the people. Where did I hear that before? The second thing is the free press, and the second thing is with religion, when it talks about Muslims as being like almost like infiltrators and so many terrorists. They say not every Muslim is a terrorist, but every terrorist is a Muslim. Well, I mean, look at the American right, kind of radical, right-wing terror. Okay. Anyways, let's continue. After the 9/11, a lot of people were labeled as anti-American. Do you know how many leftists, and Kyle Kulinski does a segment on this, how many leftists were, marginalized during the McCarthy era, right? So you don't have many Americans losing sleep over this today. Conservatives standing up for, these people just had a different idea. They were socialist leaning. No. There was a McCarthy era. Then there was a COINTELPRO, right? Counterintelligence program of the CIA, which went after, including socialists like, Martin Luther King, for example. They told him to kill himself. FBI's J. Edgar Hoover. The whole thing was against leftists. Okay. Leftists were run out of universities. They lost jobs. And today Muslims are, people are trying to make sure that mosques are not, breeding, sort of radicals. So, left wingers were constantly, the communes in the 60s, right? The American government was very afraid of like these socialistic movements. And what about that? What about, that squelching of their speech? In fact, today, most college professors who lose their jobs do so for leftist speech and not for, they're not Ben Shapiro. Anyway, you could read this. And the other thing, like Colin Kaepernick, right? He knelt for the national anthem. So all of a sudden, he needs to lose his job or get the hell out of the country. He doesn't respect our troops. Like, what does that have to do with troops? And the funny thing is, to me, is a lot of people in the South who used to vote Dixiecrat, Democrat, and then their children switched to voting Republican. They claim that they're the party of Lincoln. And guess what? They're the party of Lincoln, the true non-racists, the Republicans who were liberating the slaves. From who? From the South, right? They literally, say that they're the party of Lincoln while carrying Confederate flags, right? Which is like the Confederacy formed because Lincoln was elected, right? Like the first state to secede literally wrote that they seceded because, I think it was South Carolina, wrote because Lincoln was elected. That was the last straw for them. Okay. How can you be the party of Lincoln if you're talking about putting up Confederate statues of the people who fought against the Union Army? And then you talk about how Colin Kaepernick is not respecting our troops, but you're respecting the United States troops by honoring their enemies. I don't know. But look, that's a complicated thing. That's like in the Ukraine where you have the Bandera statues, right? Stepan Bandera was a separatist nationalist who wanted to secede from the Soviet Union. And in a way, he collaborated with Nazis And so for Jews to see his statues in Ukraine is probably just as painful as for black people to see Confederate generals. That is not to say Stepan Bandera didn't have good intentions for his countrymen and countrywomen. Same as, General Lee was a very honorable guy, probably. And look, he could have a statue. I'm not saying, but this whole thing of making taxpayer money, using taxpayer money, and then you have to look at these statues and fine. But then how can you say that you're on the side of the Union? How can you say that the parties never switched when you're literally courting a contradiction saying you're party of Lincoln and you're holding a Confederate flag? I never understood that in the South. Maybe someone can explain to me. But yeah, like there's this whole patriotic correctness in the United States, and it's on the right, and there's a lot of it. So I'm just saying, it's not just the liberal media. It's, hey, if you don't love this country, get the hell out of here, and that's what it is.
And there is a depth of free speech in this country, and people like Bill Maher really respect that and understand. I agree with that.
And by the way, just because you are for religious freedom of Muslims, or if you're for free speech and a free press, or you're for liberal values, okay, meaning like maybe Enlightenment values, or even the liberalism of like women can wear bikinis on the beach, right? That doesn't mean that you're against America, okay? Those are American ideals: tolerance, equality, the idea that all men are created equal, and women, right? So throughout history, conservatives would oppose a lot of the kind of liberalization of America. And I'm talking about like giving women the right to vote, suffragists, right? Even today, Peter Thiel is like, well, that was a mistake. Some conservatives say, well, because women vote more leftist, like they ruin the country. They vote for more socialist egalitarian policies. Another one is, allowing interracial marriages. That's why marriage licenses were around, because conservatives were opposing interracial marriage. Or how about men and women working in the same places, going to college in the same places, going to the beach, mixed beaches? I mean, seriously, you go to Times Square in New York City, you see a giant Victoria's Secret model, like everyone can just look up and see a woman in her bikini, right? Imagine that in the 50s. How would that go over with conservatives? I think even William Buckley would probably roll over in his grave. So I don't know. I think conservative is a reactionary thing to liberalization of all kinds. And of course now gay marriage. And before that, they took the anti-sodomy laws off the books in many states. Even in 2006, some of the states had anti-sodomy laws. So like this whole thing, conservatives versus liberals, I think it's not anti-American to be liberal at all. These are just two different ways to look at individual freedom. And if you want to be consistent, which is rare, most people are not, then you would oppose Donald Trump doing eminent domain and seizing things just so he could have his wall, right? You'd oppose giving him emergency powers because of a quote unquote invasion, which has been much larger in the past. And in fact, the invasions have become much smaller, like 10% of the crowds that used to come to our borders. So like, yeah, there's principle and logic. And I agree with Kyle that like we have to have logic. Like you can't just say 3 million illegals voted. I'm going to make a commission. I'm going to prove it. And then of course they can't prove it. And then it's like, well, it's still true. So I could have won the general election. It's like, that is a problem for both parties, right? And on the right, you have this sort of thing where people are disaffected with the Republican right a lot of the time, even though they themselves are conservatives, because it's like anti-evolution, like it denies global warming. So there's this whole scientific establishment that they are not. They're like anti-establishment in every way. They're like colleges are bad, government is bad. The scientific like elites are trying to tell us there's evolution, and they're trying to like teach, that there's global warming. Who are these people? There's nothing happening, and they look down and they're like, these college educated people are morons. And that's where a lot of this comes from. Also but also, of course, the college campus culture does have a growing sort of, Overton window over to like a new identitarian left where they do in fact, talk about these cultural Marxism, type things. There's white privilege. Okay, sure. Yeah, there's white privilege. There's also some black privilege when you're talking about, affirmative action. There's male privilege. Sure. A man could go out at night by himself and not have to fear so much that he's going to be chased or raped. But at the same time, there's female privilege where a man and a woman go out at night, and suddenly if there's an attack, guess who has to defend even to the death? The woman, right? She's not going to defend him. And if he doesn't do that, that relationship's over. So there's women's privilege where who goes to the war, who goes to the army, who does the risky jobs. There's a death gap, right? Who dies more on the job, etc. So of course, everyone has some privilege and everyone has some advantage and disadvantage. But there is a lot of sort of distortion on both sides. And on the left, especially in some college campuses, there's distortion. And, even with the BDS versus Israel thing, for example, there needs to be more dialogue. There needs to be less taboos of what you could say. So the one taboo that I do like in the United States that I really like is the anti-racism taboo, the anti-sexism. So what I mean is not microaggressions, but overtly saying, oh, this race is good for nothing, or, oh, those Jews, oh, those blacks, oh, women are stupider than men, or whatever. The thing is, like, you could say that in private, but it's no longer acceptable to say that publicly. And so these groups all police each other, and everyone is safe. Anti-Semitism is just a special form of racism now. Whereas in, let's say, before Nazi Germany, it was common to say, well, the Elders of Protocol of Zion, I read that thing, and it's totally like, those Jews, man, they're responsible for so much. I didn't know that. Like, that kind of stuff is not acceptable today in polite society. And it's not just Jews, but it's also like, if you're black, if you're Hispanic, if you're Chinese, or anybody. I like that part. Not because necessarily, it could be even true. It could be true that Jews do, in fact, are disproportionately represented on the Supreme Court. Jews, go into law profession quite a lot. There's a lot of, Mark Zuckerberg's Jewish, there's a lot of billionaires. So to say that Jews are running things, that is maybe factually true. And you could say that about different demographics. But the thing is, that taboo of systematically harping on it and saying, this group of people is like the stereotype, whatever. There's a taboo, and that's considered very, crass and almost like you pay a penalty, you pay a price for it immediately, right? So that I like. Where I don't like is when you go further with the microaggressions and with the, with the whole thing where it's acknowledge your privilege. Fine, acknowledge my privilege. Now let's solve the problems together, right? So you can't just wallow in the problems. You got to solve them. It's let's do body cameras for cops. Hey, let's stop using property taxes to fund schools, and let's give vouchers to people so they can get out of shitty failing schools and go to something else. Let's try things. Let's see what works, right? Yeah, I get it. I get some people have more privilege than others. I get it. We're not going to solve that immediately, but here's what we can do, right? I'd like to see more of those conversations.
That stems from political correctness, right? That comes from the speech police, but you're really only seeing it on one side.
No, that's not true at all. I believe in free speech, which is why I think Colin Kaepernick should be in the NFL right now.
Yeah, well, Colin Kaepernick was never fired from the NFL because he decided to kneel during the national anthem. He's not in the NFL because he's a horrible quarterback.
What?
All right. First of all, no, not many conservatives called for him to be fired. Or for the boycott of whatever. Oh my goodness, these triggered snowflakes to talk about I'm never going to watch NASCAR again because this guy did something. I'm never going to watch Hollywood movies. I'm never going to listen. And it's if you make a list, it's you can't trust the CIA and FBI because that's the deep state. And you can't trust Hollywood because they're all liberals, except Reagan. And you can't trust the colleges because they're full of liberal professors now. And you can't trust the scientific establishment because George Soros funds the research. And obviously they're all trying to get us with the energy, the clean energy transition. And you can't trust the European leaders or world leaders because they're all a bunch of pansies and they're just criticizing America because they don't realize we're the greatest country in the world and America number one. And that's why we got to spend trillions of dollars to defend other countries so they can have healthcare and we can't. I don't know. I just think if you make a list of all the people you now distrust, if you're really really hardcore, in a slice of America where it's okay, everything's fake news. If it's against Donald Trump, it's automatically fake news. I won't listen to it. Look at the domain. Oh, the domain is vox.com. Instant, okay, not reading it. Okay, oh, it's NewYorkTimes.com. Pulitzer winner for 100 years or whatever, 50 years. Nope, that's just a liberal rag. Oh, CNN, get out of here. Oh, this one is FoxNews.com? Oh, but that's the online version of Fox News. That's the one where they don't actually have the balanced news because they, the online version is not like the TV. They actually have whatever. So it's okay, so you're in an echo chamber, and then you distrust your friends, your family. You don't like people who are criticizing your leader or whatever. There's some slice of that, and that is there's concentric rings, right? There's people that distrust everything except Trump, right? The senators, obviously you can't trust anyone. I've asked, can you name a single senator, a Democratic senator that you would you would trust or listen to? Nope. Okay, can you name any Republicans? What about the Republicans that McCain? Oh, I hate McCain. Oh, I hate this. Okay, so what do you like? I like Trump. It's so it's an interesting mentality, and I didn't know I would see it in America so much. But then you have the concentric ring. So then you have the people who are outside of that, where they only just don't trust the scientific consensus. on like global warming. They only don't trust, different things, and they want to boycott Hollywood, or they want to do that. That's being triggered. That's like, but at least I can't call it anti-free speech because they're the ones withdrawing from it. They're not trying to shut it down. The cancel culture definitely exists and it's trying to shut things down. And that's a problem for dialogue. And even Obama came out the other day and said, that's not real activism. You can't just like shut people down. And now there's a thing. And again, I'm sympathetic to like these movements, right? The main idea behind like Me Too, right? Which is like rape is bad, right? And we should be openly talking about it and show how prevalent it is, right? But then it becomes like, well, how can I put this? Somebody touched me on the butt, says Matt Damon, and then this woman who was in Good Will Hunting, starring with him, she's like, I forgot her name, British actress. She's like, you can't tell me that touching me on the butt, like, you can't tell me that what happened to me, it wasn't exactly rape, but you can't tell me that is, you can make distinctions between gradations of things. And then Bill Maher goes after her and says, come on, you can't walk and chew gum at the same time. You can't say that there are levels. So it becomes this thing where it's like, men, shut up. Don't say anything. You can't be part of this conversation. You just got to listen. And then other people write articles like, men, why aren't you saying anything? Why are you withdrawing? This is bad for women. You should be part of the conversation. So these are not helpful things because I get that there is a problem, but there needs to be mutual embrace, like united solution, right? It's like, hey, you're an ally. Let's make a solution together. I feel like a lot of the time when you are called on to acknowledge your privilege or acknowledge that someone else is facing things that you never had to face, people take that as, like an affront, like something like, oh, you're racist or you're this. Because some people do mean it in that way. And those people ruin it for everybody else. That's what I'm trying to say. It's okay to say, there's things that other people face that I never had to face, right? I mean, there's dwarfism. There's people that are not very tall, and they have to face things that other people don't have to face every day. You have privilege. Yeah, okay. But now, like, what are we doing? Like, what is the objective, right? And I think we need more allies. We need more united in this country instead of being disunited. And I'm worried because I think the internet and politics is kind of separating people. Anyways, let's jump to the end and see if they made up in the end and everything went well.
And the bottom line is, there are inevitable patents and an economic boom just waiting to happen when it comes to green and renewable technology. And I want a Green New Deal, emphasis on the New Deal part, to bring millions of jobs to this country, pay everybody a living wage, and make sure that we run the future, that we are the leading country moving forward. And I think that we could all win if we go down that path.
All right, guys, let's give a big round of applause for Kyle and Charlie. And give a round of applause for Politicon 2019. Thank you all so much. Have a good night.
All right, I'm sorry I wasn't able to cover everything this time. And you mostly heard me speak, so I'm going to title this video as, Greg basically participating in the conversation, etc. I hope you liked what I had to say, though. I'd love to hear your comments below. And if you want me to do actual debate commentary, let me know below and which debate you'd like me to do. And whether you'd like to hear me or you'd like me to sort of do quick one-liners. Have you found what I have to say interesting? I'd love to hear that as well. Thank you. Have a great whatever is going on right there right now.